What if everything you thought you knew about history was just the surface of a much deeper, far stranger story? Picture a world where the past is not a neat, orderly timeline, but a chaotic, interconnected web of mysteries waiting to be unraveled. Every once in a while, an artifact surfaces that defies all logic, an object discovered thousands of miles from where it should be, in a place history says it could never belong. These aren't just curiosities, they are profound enigmas that challenge the very foundations of our understanding of human civilization. Today, we're embarking on a journey to explore 30 of the most obscure and baffling out-of-place artifacts ever found, each one a puzzle piece from a forgotten chapter of our shared past. Imagine holding a coin from ancient Rome in the soil of North America, or a Viking weapon buried deep in the heart of Africa. These discoveries don't just raise eyebrows, they ignite a fire of curiosity that burns through centuries of assumptions. How did these objects travel such impossible distances? Who carried them, and what forgotten journeys do they represent? For generations, historians and archaeologists have tried to fit these anomalies into existing narratives, but some findings are so extraordinary they refuse to be explained away. They whisper of lost voyages, unknown connections between cultures, and perhaps even civilizations that history has entirely overlooked. This video is your invitation to step into that world of wonder and mystery. We'll traverse continents and epochs, from the depths of the ocean to the peaks of remote mountains, uncovering artifacts that seem to defy time and space itself. Each one tells a story not just of where it was found, but of the incredible, often unbelievable journey it must have taken to get there. You'll be left questioning what you thought was possible, and by the end, you may never look at history the same way again. So settle in, open your mind, and join us as we dive into the astonishing realm of out-of-place artifacts where every discovery is a new question, and every answer only leads to deeper mysteries. Our journey begins not with a grand temple or a sunken ship, but with a single, unassuming coin discovered amidst a pile of ancient clam shells. In 1957, during a routine archaeological dig at a Native American settlement site in Maine known as the Goddard Site, amateur archaeologists were sifting through layers of a shell-midden, a centuries-old garbage dump, when they uncovered something that simply did not belong. It was a small, silver coin, slightly larger than a modern dime and heavily worn by time. For years, it sat in a collection labeled as a curious but likely modern anomaly. It wasn't until 1978 that an expert took a closer look and identified it for what it truly was: a Norse coin minted in Norway during the reign of King Olaf Kyrre between 1067 and 1093. This was the main penny, and its existence in that context was nothing short of revolutionary. Think about the timeline for a moment. This coin, struck in a Norwegian mint over 900 years ago, was found buried in a site on the northeastern coast of America that was carbon dated to between 1285 and 1365. That places it there a full century at a minimum before Christopher Columbus was even born. So how did a coin from 11th century Scandinavia end up in a pre-Columbian Native American settlement? The most tantalizing explanation is that it is physical proof of Norse presence in North America, far beyond their known settlement at Elance Oaks Meadows in Newfoundland. Perhaps it was brought by Viking explorers who sailed further down the coast, trading with the native Penobscot people. A single coin could have changed hands, a curious trinket in a much larger exchange of goods and ideas, eventually finding its way into that shell midden. Of course, a discovery this paradigm-shifting is never without controversy. The debate among archaeologists has been fierce and ongoing. Skeptics point out that the coin was found not by professional archaeologists but by volunteers, and that it was the only Norse artifact discovered at the entire site. This has led to suggestions that it could have been a hoax, perhaps planted as a prank or accidentally dropped by a much later collector. Others propose it could have been part of a modern collection that was simply lost and then incorporated into the older layers of soil. Yet, the official analysis from the experts who authenticated it states that its wear patterns are consistent with centuries of circulation, and its presence in the midden was stratigraphically sound, meaning its position in the soil layers suggested it was genuinely ancient. The mystery of the main penny endures, a tiny sliver of silver that weighs heavily on our understanding of history, forcing us to consider the possibility that the Norse exploration of the New World was far more extensive than our history books have ever dared to suggest. But if the main penny challenges the timeline of transatlantic contact, our next artifact seems to defy the very logic of historical geography altogether. Deep in the Toluca Valley, about 40 miles west of modern-day Mexico City, lie the ruins of an ancient Matlatzinca city now known as Calixtlahuaca. In 1933, archaeologist José Garcia Payon was excavating a burial site dated to around 200 AD, a period long before the rise of the Aztec Empire, when he uncovered something that should not have been there. Buried beneath a consecrated pyramid, sealed within an undisturbed layer of pre-Columbian soil, was a small terracotta head. It wasn't the style or material that was shocking, but its unmistakable artistic design. This was no local god or warrior. The figure wore a distinctively Roman hat called a pileus, and its beard and facial features were carved in a style completely consistent with Hellenistic Roman art from the 2nd century. This was the Tacaxic Calixtlahuaca head, and its discovery ignited a debate that continues to this very day. The implications are staggering. How could an artifact so clearly Roman in origin end up buried in a sealed grave in central Mexico, dating to a time when the Roman Empire was at its height across the Atlantic? The most straightforward, and therefore most revolutionary, explanation is that it is physical evidence of trans-oceanic contact between the Old and New World centuries before the voyages of Columbus. Proponents of this theory suggest a Roman vessel, perhaps blown wildly off course, might have crossed the Atlantic. Alternatively, the head could have been passed through a long and complex chain of trade, moving from hand to hand across thousands of miles over generations, eventually becoming a rare and prized possession for a Mesoamerican noble who was then buried with it. Naturally, such a bold claim invites intense skepticism. The primary counter-argument centers on the possibility of site contamination. Could this head have somehow intruded into the ancient burial from a much later layer? After all, the site was excavated in the 1930s, a time when archaeological methods were less meticulous than they are today. Critics suggest it could have been dropped by a much later Spanish colonist, perhaps even a hobbyist archaeologist from the 19th century who collected classical artifacts. However, a thermoluminescence test conducted on the head in 1995 dated its firing to between 900 and 1,290 years ago, a range that comfortably places its creation in the Roman era and aligns perfectly with the archaeological context of the burial. While this doesn't completely rule out later intrusion, it significantly strengthens the case for its authenticity. The Tacaxic Calixtlahuaca head remains a profound enigma, a silent, stony-faced witness to a connection between ancient worlds that conventional history insists is impossible, yet the evidence stubbornly refuses to dismiss. Leaving the debate of the Roman head in Mexico behind, we journey now to a far more remote and desolate location, where an artifact not of stone or metal but of geology itself presents a puzzle that seems to defy both nature and history. On the remote northern edge of the Tibetan Plateau in China's Qinghai province stands Mount Baigong. The landscape here is harsh and largely uninhabited, a vast expanse of stark beauty that feels utterly disconnected from the modern world. It was here, in the late 1990s, that a group of researchers investigating reports of a mysterious pyramid-like structure made a discovery that would become one of China's greatest enigmatics. Embedded within the mountain and scattered around a nearby saltwater lake were hundreds of mysterious iron pipes. These weren't just lying on the surface, they were fused into the solid rock of the mountain itself, as if they had been placed there when the stone was still soft millions of years ago. The pipes vary dramatically in size, with some as small as a toothpick and others nearly 1.5 feet in diameter. They run in seemingly deliberate patterns, some shooting straight down into the earth, others emerging from rock faces at precise right angles. The most astonishing concentration is at the summit, where a triangular cave opening reveals a veritable network of pipes leading from the mountain deep into a nearby lake. Analysis of the pipes revealed they are primarily composed of iron oxide, silicon dioxide, and calcium oxide, a common enough composition for rusted iron, but it's their context that is so baffling. When scientists from a nearby smelter examined them, they found something peculiar. About 8% of the material was unidentifiable. Even more perplexing was the dating. Some tests suggested these metallic structures could be as old as 150,000 years, a time when, according to conventional history, humans were barely mastering simple stone tools and were certainly incapable of advanced metallurgy. This discovery, of course, has sparked a firestorm of theories. The most tantalizing, and certainly the most popular, is that these pipes are evidence of a lost, highly advanced prehistoric civilization. Proponents of this idea suggest that an unknown culture, perhaps even visitors from another world, possessed technology far beyond our current understanding and built these conduits for an unknown purpose, perhaps for plumbing, ventilation, or even energy transfer. The remote location adds to this aura of mystery, suggesting a site of great importance that was deliberately hidden or abandoned. Others look for a more terrestrial, yet still ancient, explanation, proposing they could be the work of an advanced Chinese dynasty whose technological achievements have been lost to history. Skeptics, primarily from the scientific community, offer a far less sensational but equally fascinating explanation, that the Baigong Pipes are a rare and bizarre natural phenomenon. They propose that over immense geological timescales, iron-rich sediment could have filled in hollow spaces left by ancient tree roots or geological fissures. Through a process called diagenesis, where sediments turn into stone, these iron-filled tubes would have hardened, and then as the surrounding softer rock eroded away over millions of years, these more resistant iron structures were left protruding, creating the illusion of manufactured pipes. This theory points to similar, though much smaller, formations found elsewhere in the world known as iron concretions. The unidentifiable material could simply be a unique mineral compound formed under very specific and poorly understood conditions. Yet, the natural theory struggles to account for the pipe's precise angles, their concentrated placement, and the sheer volume of the phenomenon. If it is a natural process, it is one without a clear parallel anywhere else on Earth. The debate between the ancient astronaut theorists and the geologists remains at a stalemate, largely because the site is so remote and difficult to study that comprehensive, repeated scientific analysis has been a challenge. The Baigong Pipes stand as a silent, rusting network of questions buried in stone, a testament to the fact that our planet itself may still hold secrets from a past we have not even begun to comprehend. From the windswept isolation of the Tibetan Plateau, we travel to the warm, fertile soil of central Mexico, where a discovery emerged that doesn't just challenge our timeline of human history, but seems to tear it to shreds. In the summer of 1944, a German merchant named Waldemar Julsrud was riding his horse along the banks of a river near the town of Acámbaro in the state of Guanajuato. According to his own account, he spotted something peculiar poking out of the dirt, a small, fired clay figurine. Intrigued, he enlisted the help of a local farmer, instructing him to dig for more of these objects, promising to pay for each one he found. What happened next would become the stuff of archaeological legend. Over the next several years, the farmer and his team unearthed not a handful, not a few dozen, but ultimately more than 32,000 unique ceramic and stone artifacts from numerous burial sites. This colossal collection, now known as the Acámbaro Figures, is perhaps the most visually stunning and fiercely contested out-of-place artifact discovery in the world. The reason for the controversy is immediately apparent upon looking at them. While many of the figures depict animals and people familiar to Mesoamerican history, a significant portion of the collection showcases creatures that are shockingly, undeniably dinosaurian. There are beautifully crafted figurines of humans interacting with, riding, and even domesticating what look like Tyrannosaurus rex, Triceratops, Stegosaurus, and Pteranodons. The detail is extraordinary, with scales, crests, plates, and horns rendered with a clarity that suggests the artist was working from life. If these artifacts are genuine, they represent an impossibility so profound it would force a complete rewrite of not only human history but of paleontology itself. They suggest a reality where humans and dinosaurs coexisted, a concept that flies in the face of all established science, which states that non-avian dinosaurs went extinct 66 million years before the first humans ever walked the Earth. The man at the center of this storm, Waldemar Jolsrud, was not an archaeologist but a hardware merchant with a known interest in antiquities. He claimed the figures were ancient, dating back to a pre-Toltec civilization that had vanished over 6,000 years ago. He published a book on his findings, and the sheer scale and bizarre nature of the collection quickly drew attention. Initial excitement, however, soon gave way to intense skepticism from the scientific establishment. In 1952, archaeologist Charles Di Peso of the Amaranth Foundation conducted a thorough investigation. His team examined the figures and the way they were being excavated and came to a damning conclusion. The artifacts showed no signs of weathering or patina that would be expected from objects buried for millennia. The dirt packed inside them was loose and matched the topsoil, not the harder, more compacted soil from deeper layers. Most tellingly, the points where the figures had broken were sharp and clean, not worn and rounded by age. Di Peso declared the entire collection an elaborate and modern hoax. Further scientific analysis seemed to confirm this. Thermoluminescence dating, a method used to determine the last time ceramic was fired, was conducted on a sample of the figures in the 1970s. The results dated them to the modern era, specifically to around the 1940s, precisely when Jolsrud was paying for their discovery. To skeptics, the case was closed. The motive was simple: a local farmer and his workers, incentivized by a curious foreigner with money to spend, were mass-producing these fascinating objects and planting them for him to find. The hoax theory explains the anachronisms, the pristine condition of the artifacts, and their sudden, prolific appearance. Yet, despite what seems like overwhelming evidence against their antiquity, the Acámbaro figures have never truly faded into obscurity. A small but passionate group of alternative researchers and creationists continue to champion their authenticity. They point to later thermoluminescence tests conducted by other labs that allegedly returned dates of up to 4,000 years old, though these results are widely disputed and have not been replicated by the mainstream scientific community. They argue that the sheer number and variety of the figures would have been impossible for a small group of farmers to produce in such a short time without leaving behind evidence like kilns or workshops. They also note that many of the dinosaur depictions are remarkably accurate for the 1940s, a time when popular understanding of dinosaur anatomy was still evolving, and many reconstructions in museums were incorrect. How, they ask, could uneducated rural farmers have so skillfully sculpted dinosaurs that would only be correctly understood by paleontologists decades later? The truth likely lies in a nuanced middle ground. While a deliberate, financially motivated hoax is the most plausible explanation, it doesn't entirely strip the Acámbaro figures of their intrigue. They stand as a powerful testament to the human imagination and our enduring fascination with the monstrous and the unknown. Whether ancient artifacts or modern folk art, they have cemented their place in the world of historical mysteries, capturing our collective imagination and forcing us to confront the uncomfortable possibility that our past might be far stranger and far less settled than we are often led to believe. While the Acámbaro figures present a human-made mystery of potentially recent origin, our next artifact appears to be a straightforward tool trapped in a geological impossibility. In the summer of 1936, a couple hiking along the banks of Red Creek near the town of London, Texas, made a discovery that would become a cornerstone of the creationist movement and a persistent thorn in the side of mainstream geology. As the story goes, they spotted a curious piece of weathered rock with a chunk of wood protruding from it. Taking it home and cracking it open, they found inside what looked for all the world like a modern carpenter's hammer, its iron head seamlessly encased within the solid, ancient stone. This is the London hammer, an object that at first glance seems to be a clear-cut anachronism, a man-made tool from a time when humans were not supposed to exist. The hammer itself is unremarkable in its design. It features a wooden handle that is partially petrified and an iron head that is strangely elongated and rounded, a style that some have noted resembles 19th century American mining hammers. The extraordinary part is the rock that entombed it. The concretion, a hard nodule of rock that formed around the object, was identified as originating from the Cretaceous period, an era that ended 66 million years ago. For those who believe the hammer is authentic to its stone casing, the conclusion is earth-shattering. It is definitive proof that humans lived alongside dinosaurs, completely invalidating the modern geological and evolutionary timescales. This interpretation has made the London hammer a revered icon, frequently cited as evidence for a young Earth and a vastly different historical narrative than the one taught in textbooks. However, the geological community offers a far less sensational but scientifically robust explanation for this apparent miracle. The key to the mystery lies in understanding the specific type of rock that encases the hammer. It is not a chunk of primordial Cretaceous bedrock, but a limestone concretion. Concretions are fascinating geological formations that can occur relatively quickly in geological terms. They form when mineral cement precipitates and hardens around a nucleus, often an organic object like a shell, a bone, or indeed a lost hammer, in water-saturated sediments. The process can encapsulate the object, protecting it from decay and creating a hard, rock-like shell that can make a modern object appear incredibly ancient. The mineral-rich waters around Red Creek are known for rapidly forming such concretions around all sorts of debris. Further analysis of the hammer's composition supports this modern origin story. The iron of the head was found to contain unusual amounts of chlorine and is of a high purity, consistent with 19th century metallurgical techniques without any slag inclusions common in ancient iron. The wooden handle, while partially mineralized, is not fully fossilized. It still contains original organic material that could not have survived for millions of years. The most logical scenario is that a laborer in the 1800s mislaid his hammer near the creek. Over the decades, the tool was buried in sediment, and the unique chemical conditions of the water percolating through the soil facilitated the rapid formation of a hard, stone-like concretion around it. When the hikers found it, they mistakenly assumed the concretion was a piece of ancient bedrock, not realizing it was a much younger geological phenomenon that had merely made the hammer look far older than it truly was. The story of the London hammer is a powerful lesson in how our perceptions can be deceived by natural processes. It doesn't require a rewriting of history, but rather a deeper appreciation for the clever and often counterintuitive ways geology operates. It shows how an object from one time can become entombed in materials that give it the appearance of belonging to a completely different epoch. While it may disappoint those hoping for a world-altering revelation, the true story is no less fascinating, a testament to the dynamic and ongoing processes of our planet that can, on occasion, create perfect illusions of the impossible. Leaving the controversial hammer of Texas behind, we venture into the arid landscapes of California's Coso Mountains, where in 1961, a discovery was made that seemed to fuse the ancient with the industrial in a way that defied all rational explanation. Three rockhounds, Mike Mikesell, Wallace Lane, and Virginia Maxey, were searching for geodes, those fascinating hollow rocks that often contain beautiful crystal interiors. While cutting into what they thought was a promising specimen, Mikesell's saw blade was nearly ruined by an impossibly hard substance inside. Upon closer inspection, they found the geode contained not glittering crystals, but a mechanical-looking object. At its center was a ceramic ring surrounded by a hexagonal sheath of what appeared to be corroded metal, and through its center ran a 2-millimeter shaft of bright, shining metal. It looked for all the world like a modern spark plug encased in a lump of stone purported to be 500,000 years old. This was the Coso Artifact, and it immediately became a flagship piece of evidence for those who believe in ancient, advanced civilizations or even prehistoric visitors from other worlds. The initial analysis seemed to support an incredible age. A geologist who examined the outer crust of the nodule identified it as a concretion, a hardened mass of clay, pebbles, and fossils, and suggested it could have taken a minimum of 500,000 years to form. The implication was staggering. A spark plug, a technology invented in the 1860s, was somehow sealed inside a mineral formation that predated modern humans. This led to extraordinary theories. Perhaps it was a relic from the lost continent of Mu or Atlantis, evidence of a technologically sophisticated society that was wiped from the historical record. Others, looking even further out, proposed it was a component from an ancient spaceship left behind by extraterrestrial visitors in Earth's distant past. For a time, the Coso Artifact stood as one of the most compelling and tangible pieces of evidence for what is often called UPART's out-of-place artifacts. However, the true story of the Coso Artifact is a masterclass in the importance of skepticism and rigorous investigation. As the object gained notoriety, it attracted the attention of Pierre Stromberg and Paul Heinrich, two researchers dedicated to solving such geological mysteries. Their investigation took a critical turn when they managed to obtain better X-rays of the object than those available in the 1960s. The new images revealed far more detail, showing not just a simple shaft and ceramic, but a spring, a copper washer, and a threaded sheath. The complete object was unmistakably a champion spark plug from the early 20th century, a specific model used in Ford's Model T and Model A automobiles in the 1920s. The mystery of its encasement was also solved. The hard, rock-like shell was not a 500,000-year-old geode, but a concretion of iron oxide or rust that had formed with surprising speed around the spark plug. The environment provided the perfect conditions for this illusion. The spark plug had likely been lost or discarded on a dirt road in the mineral-rich Coso Mountains, perhaps falling from an old truck in the 1920s or 30s. Exposed to the elements, the iron parts of the plug began to rust severely. In a process called differential cementation, the rusting metal acted as a nucleus, attracting and cementing together the surrounding clay, sand, and small pebbles. Because the area was known for its authentic geodes, the finders naturally assumed the hard, lumpy concretion was one itself. The timeline was not millennia, but mere decades. The ancient artifact was, in fact, a perfect example of how nature can rapidly create a convincing facade of immense antiquity around a mundane modern object. The journey of the Coso Artifact from a world-altering anomaly to an identified piece of early automotive history offers a crucial lesson for all enthusiasts of the unexplained. It underscores the necessity of applying Occam's razor, the principle that the simplest explanation is often the correct one. It also highlights how our initial perceptions, especially when fueled by a desire for the extraordinary, can lead us to misinterpret the evidence before our eyes. This isn't to say that all mysteries are so easily solved, but the Coso Artifact remains a powerful reminder that a critical, evidence-based approach is our most valuable tool for separating genuine historical enigmas from clever illusions crafted by time and nature. Following the story of the spark plug turned to stone, we now turn our attention to an object that seems to blend the worlds of paleontology and high technology in a single, baffling discovery. In 1974, construction workers were excavating a site on the banks of the Meuse River, not far from the Romanian town of Aiud. As they dug roughly 30 feet deep into a trench of sand, their machinery unearthed something unexpected: 3 objects buried together. 2 of them were large fossilized bones, later identified as belonging to a mastodon, an extinct relative of the elephant that roamed the earth during the Pleistocene epoch. The 3rd object, nestled alongside these ancient remains, was a wedge-shaped piece of heavily weathered metal. This peculiar trio was sent to the Archaeological Institute in Cluj-Napoca for examination, and after a preliminary look, the 2 bones were quickly catalogued. But the metal object, now known as the Aiud wedge, would become the center of a mystery that endures to this day. The wedge itself is a little over 8 inches long, 5 inches wide, and about 3 inches thick, with what appears to be a manufactured concavity on its underside. Its most startling feature was revealed when samples were sent for metallurgical analysis. The test showed it was composed of an alloy, primarily aluminum, with 12 other elements including copper, zinc, silicon, and cadmium. To the untrained eye, this might not seem remarkable, but the implications are profound when you consider the context. The mastodon bones it was found with were dated to be approximately 20,000 years old. The problem is that aluminum, in its refined metallic form, simply did not exist in nature until very recently in human history. While aluminum is the most abundant metal in the Earth's crust, it is always found tightly bonded with other elements in ore. It wasn't until the 1820s that the element was first isolated, and it wasn't produced in any significant quantity until the invention of the Hall-Héroult electrolytic process in 1886. So how could a refined aluminum object, a product of 19th century industrial technology, be found buried 20 feet deep in a layer of sand alongside the bones of an animal that went extinct tens of thousands of years ago? For proponents of alternative history theories, the answer is obvious and revolutionary. They argue the wedge is a genuine artifact of a lost, highly advanced civilization, perhaps even evidence of extraterrestrial visitations in Earth's remote past. They point to the heavy oxide layer covering the object, which they claim is evidence of its immense age, and suggest that our conventional timeline of human technological development is completely wrong. This single piece of metal, they say, is proof that advanced manufacturing existed in a time when humanity was supposedly only using simple stone tools. However, the scientific and archaeological communities offer a far more grounded, though no less fascinating, explanation. The key lies in the specific type of aluminum alloy identified in the analysis. The composition, particularly the presence of elements like cadmium, is not a standard modern aerospace or industrial grade, but it is consistent with alloys used in the very early days of aluminum production in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. This suggests the object is not a prehistoric relic, but a piece of relatively modern machinery. The most plausible theory is that the wedge was a component from a piece of heavy excavation or mining equipment, such as the tooth from a bucket dredger or a part from a bulldozer. But how did it get buried so deep? This is where geology provides the answer. The site where it was found, a riverbank, is a dynamic environment. Sand and sediment are constantly being deposited and eroded by the flowing water. It is entirely possible that this piece of machinery was lost or broke off from a dredging barge operating on the Meuse River sometime in the late 1800s or early 1900s. Over the subsequent decades, the natural processes of the river would have buried it under many feet of sand. The mastodon bones, on the other hand, were already fossilized and buried in an older layer. The modern construction excavation simply cut through these different strata simultaneously, bringing the ancient fossils and the century-old piece of metal to the surface together, creating the illusion that they were deposited at the same time. The heavy oxidation layer on the wedge is not a sign of 20,000 years of age, but of a century spent submerged in the mineral-rich waters of a river. The Aod wedge stands as a perfect example of a pseudo-out-of-place artifact. It is not a true anachronism, but a compelling case of a modern object being misinterpreted due to its unusual archaeological context. It teaches us a crucial lesson about the importance of understanding site formation processes and the deceptive power of stratigraphy. A discovery is not always what it first appears to be, and the most extraordinary claims often have the most ordinary explanations, waiting to be uncovered by a careful, scientific analysis of all the evidence. This journey into the bizarre brings us next to one of the most enduring and visually evocative myths in all of alternative history, a story that combines high-altitude adventure with a tantalizing hint of interstellar contact. The tale begins in 1938 amid the rugged, snow-capped peaks of the Baigong Mountains on the border between China and Tibet. According to the popular account, a Chinese archaeologist named Kai Pu-te was leading an expedition through the remote and treacherous passes when he and his team stumbled upon a series of curiously arranged caves. Upon entering, they made a series of astonishing discoveries. The caves showed clear signs of artificial construction, their walls squared and smoothed as if by tools, and inside they found rows of graves containing the skeletal remains of unusually small, fragile-looking beings with large, oversized skulls. But the most perplexing find was scattered across the cave floor, hundreds of stone discs, each about 9 inches in diameter, with a perfectly round hole in their center, resembling primitive phonograph records. These were the infamous Dropa stones. The story, as it's often told, takes an even more incredible turn. The discs were allegedly covered in a spiral groove of tiny, hieroglyphic-like characters, a script so minute it was almost invisible to the naked eye. The stones were supposedly shipped back to Beijing for study, but their true secret wasn't unlocked for another 2 decades. In 1962, a doctor, Tsum Nui, finally managed to decipher the enigmatic writing. His translated text, as the legend goes, told a harrowing story of a spacecraft from a distant planet that had crash-landed in the mountains 12,000 years ago. The survivors, the peaceful Dropa people, were unable to repair their ship and became stranded on Earth. The local Ham tribesmen, fearing these strange, small beings, hunted and killed most of them. The stones were their final record, a tragic message detailing their plight and their doomed hopes of returning home. It's a powerful and compelling narrative, a perfect storm of sci-fi wonder and archaeological mystery that has captured the imagination of millions and has been featured in countless books, documentaries, and websites dedicated to the unexplained. The problem, however, is that there is not a single shred of credible evidence to support any part of this story. Every attempt to verify the basic facts hits a dead end. There are no records of an archaeologist named Kai Pu-te or a philologist named Tsum Nui in any academic institution in China. No photographs of the caves, the skeletons, or the discs themselves have ever been produced from the original expedition. The very existence of the stones outside of anecdotal stories is completely unverified. No museum in the world has one in its collection, and they have never been subjected to any form of scientific analysis. So how did such a detailed and intricate myth come into being? The trail of the Dropa stones leads not to a Chinese archaeological journal, but to a German author and UFO enthusiast named Erich von Däniken. He popularized the story in his 1968 best-selling book, Chariots of the Gods, presenting it as potential proof of his ancient astronaut theory. But even von Däniken was working from a secondary source. The story first appeared in a Russian magazine called Sputnik and in a series of articles by a writer named Vladimir Eskevarikov in the early 1960s. These articles themselves were likely based on earlier, obscure European pulp magazines that specialized in fantastical stories presented as fact. The entire narrative appears to be a classic piece of fiction that was picked up, repeated, and embellished over time until it took on a life of its own, divorced from any original source material. Furthermore, the story contains internal logic flaws that undermine its own credibility. The claim that a script was physically carved in a continuous spiral on stone discs is incredibly impractical. Writing on stone is a laborious process typically reserved for short, important inscriptions, not long narratives. The notion that a technologically advanced race capable of interstellar travel would choose to record their final testament by painstakingly chiseling tiny glyphs onto heavy stone discs, rather than using a far more efficient and durable method, simply doesn't hold up to scrutiny. When compared to genuine archaeological mysteries like the Main Penny or the Takaxic Calixtlahuaca head, which are physical objects with documented provenance that spark legitimate debate, the Dropa stones stand apart as a complete fabrication. Yet, despite being thoroughly debunked by archaeologists and historians, the myth persists with remarkable vitality. Its endurance speaks to a deep and universal human desire, the hope that we are not alone in the universe and that evidence of our cosmic neighbors is hidden just beneath the surface of our own history, waiting to be found. The Dropa stones fulfill a narrative need for a tangible, ancient artifact that provides a simple, dramatic answer to the big questions of human origins. They represent a form of modern folklore, a cultural meme that is far more about our present-day hopes and fears than it is about any real prehistoric event. They serve as a cautionary tale about how easily a good story, once told, can outpace the boring, evidence-based truth, becoming an unkillable legend that continues to inspire wonder and belief in the impossible. Yet another South American mystery, this one far more prolific and visually stunning than the Acámbaro figures, emerged from the dusty plains of Peru. In the 1960s, a local physician named Dr. Javier Cabarrudacquia began amassing a collection of stones that would eventually number in the tens of thousands. These were the Ica Stones, and they were unlike any other archaeological find on the planet. The stones, typically andesite, a hard, grey volcanic rock, varied in size from smaller than a fist to larger than a person. Their surfaces were covered in intricate, fine-line engravings that had then been filled with a powdery pigment to make the images stand out, and what images they were. They depicted a world that was utterly impossible by conventional historical standards. There were detailed scenes of humans performing complex open-heart surgery and brain transplants using advanced medical tools. There were accurate star charts and maps of unknown continents. Most famously and most shockingly, there were countless images of humans living alongside, fighting, and even riding what can only be described as dinosaurs, rendered with a startling anatomical accuracy that seemed to defy their supposed ancient origin. Dr. Cabarrud built an entire museum in Ica to house his collection and developed an elaborate theory to explain them. He proposed that the stones were a library left by a superior, ancient civilization, which he called Glyptolithica. This culture, he claimed, possessed advanced technology and co-existed with dinosaurs, and the stones were their chosen method of recording knowledge for posterity. The story captured the global imagination, becoming a cornerstone of the ancient astronaut and young Earth creationist movements. Here, it seemed, was undeniable proof, etched in stone, that our history books were fundamentally wrong. The sheer volume of the collection made it feel authoritative. It seemed implausible that so many thousands of detailed engravings could be a hoax. The truth, however, began to unravel when investigators looked closer at the stones' provenance. The vast majority were not unearthed in a proper archaeological dig. Instead, they were sold to Dr. Cabrera and other collectors by local farmers known as huqueros who claimed to have found them in caves and riverbanks. The story took a decisive turn in 1973 when the farmers, after being arrested for selling pre-Columbian artifacts, confessed that the entire thing was a fabrication. They demonstrated how they created the stones. They would acquire smooth river rocks, engrave them using dental drills and metal knives, and then age the fresh engravings by rubbing them with a paste of shoe polish and animal fat before baking them in cow dung to create a patina. The farmers stated they had been producing these stones for decades, inspired by popular comic books, textbooks, and dinosaur illustrations to create designs that would appeal to wealthy tourists and collectors. They were simply meeting a demand, and Dr. Cabrera had been their most enthusiastic and generous customer. With such a clear confession and demonstration of the method, the scientific community universally dismissed the Ica stones as a 20th century hoax. Geologists who examined them noted that the dark patina on the engraved lines was only skin deep and could be easily scratched away, revealing the bright, unweathered stone beneath, a clear sign of recent work. The stylistic variations across the massive collection also pointed to multiple modern artists, not a single ancient culture. Yet, despite this overwhelming evidence, the stones have refused to fade into obscurity. Why does this particular hoax maintain such a powerful grip on the alternative history community? The answer lies in the potent combination of its visual appeal and its narrative power. The images on the stones are not crude doodles. They are often compelling and complex, tapping directly into our deepest cultural fascinations with lost worlds and forgotten knowledge. For those already inclined to distrust mainstream archaeology, the confession of the farmers is often dismissed as coerced or a cover-up by a shadowy establishment seeking to suppress the truth. The stones serve as perfect, tangible symbols for a much broader rebellion against accepted scientific narratives. They are not valued for their authenticity as ancient artifacts, but for their utility as icons. They represent the idea that evidence is being hidden from the public, and their continued display in Dr. Cabrera's museum, now run by his family, allows believers to point to a physical location housing their proof, making the myth feel more real than a mere story in a book. The Ica stones, therefore, are more than a simple hoax. They are a fascinating case study in how a modern creation can be reinvented as sacred evidence for a belief system that finds more meaning in mystery than in a settled, if less exciting, truth. From the elaborate hoaxes of Ica, we now voyage into the deep blue waters of the Mediterranean Sea, where a genuine discovery of staggering complexity was lifted from the silent wreck of a 2,000-year-old Roman cargo ship. In the spring of 1901, a group of Greek sponge divers, seeking refuge from a storm near the tiny island of Antikythera, decided to explore the local waters. What they found on the seabed, some 150 feet below, was not a new sponge bed, but the decaying timbers and scattered treasures of an ancient vessel. Over the subsequent months, a breathtaking haul of statues, coins, jewelry, and glassware was recovered. But among these beautiful artifacts was a single, unassuming lump of corroded bronze and wood, about the size of a large book, that seemed utterly unremarkable. It was set aside with other less glamorous finds, and for nearly half a century it was largely ignored, its true nature hidden beneath a thick, calcified crust. The moment of revelation came in the 1950s when a scientist named Derek J. Dusola Price began a meticulous investigation of the object. As he carefully used X-rays to peer inside the rock-hard casing, he was met with an image that defied all logical expectations for an artifact dating to the 1st century BC. He wasn't looking at a statue or a vase, he was looking at the intricate inner workings of a machine, gears, dozens of them, precisely interlocked and arranged in complex configurations. This was the Antikythera Mechanism, and it has since been recognized as the world's oldest known analog computer, a device of such sophistication that its technological equal would not be seen again for over a millennium. The mechanism was housed in a wooden case with bronze front and back plates covered in inscriptions. A user's manual etched in Greek. On the front was a large circular dial with pointers, and on the back 2 spiral dials. Using advanced imaging technology like 3D X-ray tomography, researchers have been able to virtually reconstruct the mangled gears and finally decipher the cryptic text. The results are nothing short of astonishing. This was not a toy or a simple calendar. It was a precise, hand-cranked astronomical calculator. By turning a handle on the side, an operator could simulate the motions of the heavens. Its dials could predict the positions of the sun, the moon, and the 5 known planets against the backdrop of the zodiac. It could forecast lunar and solar eclipses with remarkable accuracy. One of its most beautiful functions was a dial that tracked the 4-year cycle of the ancient Olympic Games. It even modeled the irregular orbit of the moon, accounting for its elliptical path with a clever pin and slot device that mimicked the physics of the cosmos, a feature of mechanical genius that historians of science believed was invented in the 14th century. The existence of such a device in the 2nd or 1st century BC forces a complete reappraisal of ancient Greek technological capabilities. We are often taught to think of the classical world in terms of its philosophical ideas, its art, and its architecture, but not its machinery. The Antikythera Mechanism shatters that image. It tells us that the workshop of its creator was a place where advanced metallurgy, precision engineering, and profound astronomical knowledge converged. The gears were cut from a single sheet of bronze, their teeth hand-filed with a degree of accuracy that would challenge a modern machinist. This was not a one-off miracle. It implies a tradition of fine mechanics, a school of craftsmanship and scientific instrument making that has been entirely lost to history. The writings of Cicero mention a device built by the great inventor Archimedes that could replicate the movements of the planets. A device so prized it was carried back to Rome as war booty. It is tantalizing to think the Antikythera Mechanism may be a descendant of that very tradition, a glimpse into a level of technological achievement we never knew existed. The great mystery of the Antikythera Mechanism is not its purpose, which we now understand, but its isolation. Why is it the only device of its kind ever found? If this technology was known, why did it vanish for 1,000 years? The most likely answer is one of fragility and circumstance. The sophisticated bronze gears would have been incredibly valuable and would have been melted down for their metal long before they could be buried and preserved. This one specimen survived only because it was lost in a shipwreck, sealed in a watery time capsule. Its complexity suggests it was a luxury item, a teaching tool for a wealthy philosopher, or perhaps even navigation aid for a ship's captain. The fact that we have found only one is a sobering reminder of how fragmentary our archaeological record truly is. We have only discovered a tiny fraction of what the ancient world created, and the Antikythera Mechanism stands as a powerful testament to the fact that the past was almost certainly far more inventive, more curious, and more technologically daring than we have ever given it credit for. It is not an out-of-place artifact in the sense of being impossible, but rather a precious survivor from a lost chapter of human ingenuity that was tragically ahead of its time. After plumbing the depths of the Mediterranean to uncover the Antikythera Mechanism, we now set our sights on a different kind of marvel, one not hidden in a shipwreck but preserved on parchment in the Topkapi Palace Museum in Istanbul. In 1929, a group of historians cataloging the palace's vast library made a discovery that would ignite a century of debate. It was a map drawn on gazelle skin in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral and cartographer named Piri Reis. He noted in the margins that he had compiled it from 20 different source charts, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great. On its own, this would be a fascinating historical document. But it was the content of the map that truly stunned researchers, for it appeared to depict a continent that would not be officially discovered for another 300 years, the coastline of Antarctica seemingly free of its massive ice cap. The section of the map in question shows the southern Atlantic Ocean, with the eastern coast of South America and the western coast of Africa rendered with surprising, though not perfect, accuracy. But it is the landmass that stretches across the bottom of the map that has become the focal point of intense speculation. Its contours bear a startling resemblance to the subglacial topography of Queen Maud Land, Antarctica, as revealed by modern seismic surveys. For proponents of alternative history, this is not a coincidence. They argue that the Piri Reis map is a copy of a copy, tracing its lineage back to ancient seafaring cultures who possessed knowledge of an ice-free Antarctica, a condition that last existed thousands, if not millions, of years ago. This interpretation suggests that a highly advanced, now vanished civilization had achieved global exploration and cartography in a distant, warmer epoch, and their knowledge was passed down through the ages to medieval and Ottoman mapmakers. This theory, while captivating, faces significant and immediate geographical challenges. The most glaring issue is scale. The mysterious southern continent on the Piri Reis map is shown attached to South America, with no Drake Passage separating them. In reality, the gap between Cape Horn and the Antarctic Peninsula is over 600 miles of some of the most treacherous seas on the planet. Furthermore, the map lacks the Palmer Peninsula, Antarctica's most prominent and navigable feature, which juts out towards South America. If a pre-modern civilization was mapping an ice-free Antarctica, one would expect these critical and unmistakable geographical features to be present and accurately portrayed, which they are not. So if it's not Antarctica, what is it? Mainstream scholars and cartographic historians offer a far more conventional, yet still fascinating explanation. They propose that the controversial landmass is actually a composite, a best-guess effort by Piri Reis and his sources to map the then unknown southern reaches of the world. It is likely a distorted and conflated representation of the southern coasts of South America, particularly the Patagonian region, combined with rumors and myths of a great southern land, or terra australis incognita, which had been a staple of European geography since the time of the ancient Greeks. Mapmakers often filled blank spaces on their charts with speculative geography based on travelers' tales and classical legends. The coastlines might be a misinterpretation of the Brazilian coast, pushed far to the south and elongated to fit the available space on the skin. The close proximity to South America isn't a revelation of the continental connection, but a simple cartographic error, a common occurrence in a time when longitude was impossible to measure accurately at sea. The true story of the Piri Reis map is not one of lost ancient knowledge, but a testament to the ingenious, if imperfect, methods of historical mapmaking. Piri Reis himself was a compiler, not an original explorer of the far South Atlantic. He openly credited his sources, which included Portuguese charts of newly discovered Brazil and maps from the Islamic Golden Age that preserved Greek geographical concepts. He was synthesizing all the known information of his day, blending hard-won empirical data from recent voyages with the enduring weight of classical tradition. The result is a beautiful and complex palimpsest of geographical understanding from the dawn of the age of exploration, a snapshot of a world that was still half filled with mystery. While it may not be a literal map of an ice-free Antarctica, it remains a priceless artifact that captures the moment when the old world's imagination began to collide with the new world's reality, creating a document that is both wonderfully accurate in parts and beautifully speculative in others. Moving from the grand, speculative cartography of the Piri Reis map, we now zoom in on a far smaller, yet no less revolutionary object, a simple clay jar that might just rewrite the history of technology. In 1936, workers excavating an ancient Parthian village just outside Baghdad, Iraq, unearthed a curious artifact. It wasn't a glittering piece of jewelry or a fearsome weapon, but a humble 5-inch-tall clay pot with a copper cylinder soldered with a 60-40 lead tin alloy fixed inside. Through the cylinder's center ran an iron rod isolated from the copper by a stopper made of asphalt. The jar showed clear signs of corrosion with a curious acidic residue coating the interior. To the German archaeologist Wilhelm Koenig, who studied it a few years later, it didn't look like a container for scrolls or perfume. It looked for all the world like a primitive electrochemical cell. This is the famous and famously controversial Baghdad Battery. The theory is as elegant as it is astonishing. If the jar were filled with an acidic electrolyte like vinegar or grape juice, a chemical reaction would occur. The acidic liquid would interact with the two different metals, the copper cylinder and the iron rod, creating a potential difference or voltage between them. In essence, this would form a basic galvanic cell, capable of generating a small but measurable electric current, perhaps just over a single volt. The concept is so simple that modern experimenters have built countless replicas that do exactly that, proving the principle is sound. If this was its intended purpose, it would mean the ancient Parthians or Sasanians, around 2,000 years ago, had stumbled upon the principles of electricity over a millennium before Galvani and Volta began their experiments in Europe. This single, unassuming pot could be the world's oldest known battery. But what would an ancient civilization do with a single volt of electricity? The most popular and visually compelling hypothesis involves electroplating. The process of gilding or silvering objects with a thin layer of precious metal using electricity was well known in the ancient Near East. Small, intricate statues and decorative items from Mesopotamia have been found covered in a microscopically thin layer of gold, applied with a technique that has never been fully explained. Could a bank of these Baghdad batteries, wired together in a series to create a higher voltage, have been used for exactly this purpose? A craftsman could have used them to electroplate a silver statuette with a dazzling, durable layer of gold, creating a priceless object of reverence and wealth. Other theories suggest a more mystical purpose. Perhaps the mild electric shock was used for medicinal purposes, a form of ancient electrotherapy to treat pain, or maybe the current was used in religious ceremonies to create a tingling sensation on the skin of worshippers, simulating a divine touch. However, the majority of mainstream archaeologists are deeply skeptical of the battery hypothesis, and their counter-arguments are firmly rooted in the practical realities of the archaeological record. The primary issue is one of context and evidence. While the basic design could function as a cell, there is no direct evidence that it ever did. No wires have ever been found with these jars to connect them in a series. No electroplated objects from the period show technical signs of having been plated electrolytically rather than by other known ancient methods like mercury gilding. Furthermore, the asphalt stopper that seals the top is completely solid. It would have to be broken to add or replace the electrolyte, making the cell a single-use item, which seems incredibly impractical. If these were truly batteries, why have so few been found? Only about a dozen such jars are known to exist, a tiny number for what would have been a transformative technology. The alternative explanation is far more mundane and, to an archaeologist, far more plausible. These were simply secure storage containers for sacred scrolls. In this interpretation, the iron rod was a convenient handle to pull the scroll out, and the copper cylinder was its protective case. The asphalt seal was just that, a seal to keep out moisture and protect the precious organic contents from decay. The acidic residue inside could be explained by the decomposition of the papyrus or parchment scroll itself over centuries. This interpretation fits neatly with other finds from the region and the era, where the preservation of important texts was a paramount concern. The debate, therefore, is a classic clash of perspectives. One side looks at the object and sees its potential function, using modern knowledge to reverse engineer a possible ancient use. The other side looks at the broader cultural and archaeological context and sees an object that fits a well-established, if less glamorous, pattern of everyday ancient life. The true significance of the Baghdad Battery may not lie in proving that the ancient world had electricity, but in what it reveals about our own relationship with the past. It is a Rorschach test for history. We look at this ambiguous object and we see what we want to see. Some see undeniable proof of ancient ingenuity, a spark of modern knowledge flickering in the distant past. Others see a pragmatic storage solution, a testament to the practical needs of a long-vanished society. This tension is at the very heart of archaeology. It forces us to ask a difficult question. Are we interpreting the past based on the evidence we have, or are we projecting our own modern expectations and desires onto it? The Baghdad Battery, in its silent mystery, doesn't give us a definitive answer. Instead, it holds up a mirror, challenging us to consider whether we are discovering history or inventing it. From the electrochemical mysteries of Mesopotamia, we travel to the sun-baked sands of Egypt, where an object of elegant simplicity has launched a high-flying debate about the technological aspirations of the ancients. In 1898, during the excavation of a tomb in the vast Saqqara necropolis, archaeologists uncovered a small, carefully carved wooden object. It was catalogued simply as Artifact 6347 and stored away in the Cairo Museum's collection of bird figurines. For decades, it gathered dust, considered a charming but unremarkable model of a falcon, a common motif in a culture that revered avian deities like Horus. It wasn't until the 1970s that this unassuming artifact was pulled from its drawer and seen in a startling new light. When a keen-eyed researcher examined it, they noticed something peculiar. Unlike other bird models, this one had a vertical tail fin, straight and rigid like that of a modern airplane, rather than the horizontal, fanned tail of a real bird. This single observation was the seed from which the legend of the Saqqara bird grew. The object itself is a study in graceful lines, carved from sycamore wood and dating to approximately 200 BC. It has a wingspan of just over 7 inches and weighs a mere 40 grams. Its beak is clean and sharp, and its body is smooth, lacking any carved feathers or intricate details that would mark it as a purely decorative item. Proponents of the ancient aircraft theory, most notably the aviation historian Simon Sanderson, point to these very features as evidence of its true purpose. They argue that the wings are angled with a slight dihedral, a feature that provides lateral stability in flight. The vertical tail, they claim, is a crucial aerodynamic component, absolutely essential for an aircraft to maintain its heading and prevent a sideways slip through the air, yet completely non-functional and even counterproductive for a bird in flight. To test this theory, exact-scale replicas have been built, some with the addition of a horizontal stabilizer that the original lacks. When launched with a little thrust, these models have been shown to glide for considerable distances, demonstrating aerodynamic properties that seem to go far beyond what one would expect from a simple toy or religious offering. This interpretation paints a breathtaking picture. It suggests that the ancient Egyptians, or a culture that influenced them, had somehow grasped the fundamental principles of aerodynamics over 2,000 years before the Wright brothers' first flight at Kitty Hawk. The theories for how this could be possible are as ambitious as they are speculative. Some suggest it could be a scale model of a much larger, manned glider or even a primitive aircraft, a design that was either experimental or perhaps used in ceremonial events. Others, looking even further outside the box, have proposed it might represent the knowledge of a lost civilization or even inspiration drawn from visitations by an advanced, technologically sophisticated culture. The Saqqara bird, in this view, becomes a tiny, wooden whisper of a forgotten chapter in human innovation, a hint that the path to the sky might have been attempted long before we believed it was possible. However, the majority of Egyptologists and archaeologists offer a far more grounded and culturally consistent explanation. They see the Saqqara bird not as an aircraft blueprint, but through the lens of well-established Egyptian symbolism and daily life. The most widely accepted theory is that it is a ceremonial votive object, a model of a falcon dedicated to the god Horus. Falcons were deeply sacred in Egyptian mythology, symbolizing divine kingship and the protection of the pharaoh. A simple, streamlined wooden figure like this could have been a popular and affordable offering left at a temple by a commoner seeking the god's favor, much like lighting a candle in a church today. Its lack of detailed carving isn't evidence of aerodynamic design, but rather a sign of mass production for a thriving market in religious tokens. Another strong possibility is that it was simply a child's toy. Ancient Egyptians had toys. Dolls, balls, and animal pull toys have all been found in archaeological contexts. A lightweight wooden bird would make a perfect plaything. The unusual vertical tail could be explained not as a rudder but as a practical base. If the bird was meant to be mounted on a stand, perhaps as part of a larger model or even as the masthead of a ritual boat, a flat, vertical tail would provide a stable surface for attachment. Alternatively, if it was a throwing toy similar to a boomerang or a glider, its design could be the result of pure intuitive trial and error. A craftsman, through observation and playful experimentation, might have accidentally stumbled upon a shape that flew well without possessing any formal understanding of the physics behind it. This would make it an example of empirical design rather than theoretical engineering. The debate over the Saqqara bird is a perfect case study in the phenomenon of pareidolia, the human tendency to see familiar patterns, especially modern technological ones, in ancient objects. We look at it from our perspective in a world filled with airplanes, and we see an airplane. An ancient Egyptian living in a world filled with religious symbolism and sacred birds would have seen a bird. This doesn't diminish the object's intrigue, it simply reframes it. The true wonder of the Saqqara bird may not be that it proves the Egyptians had airplanes, but that it demonstrates the universal human desire to take to the skies. Whether as a sacred offering to a sky god, a child's imaginary companion in play, or the product of a curious mind experimenting with flight, this small wooden carving represents a dream that is as old as civilization itself. It is a tangible expression of our timeless fascination with flight, a dream that would remain just out of reach for centuries until finally, millennia after it was carved, humanity would finally learn to soar. While our journey has taken us across continents and deep into the past, our next artifact brings us to a much more recent and deeply personal chapter of American history. In the autumn of 1898, a Swedish immigrant farmer named Olof Oman was toiling on his land near the small town of Kensington, Minnesota. As he and his son cleared a field of trees, they uprooted a large poplar, its roots tightly gripping a heavy, flat slab of greywacke stone. When they pulled it free and wiped away the dirt, they were met with an astonishing sight. The stone was covered in intricate carvings of a style they had never seen before. This was the Kensington Runestone, and its inscription would ignite a firestorm that continues to smolder over a century later. The message carved into the stone, if genuine, is nothing short of historic. Written in a form of Old Norse using runic letters, it tells a harrowing tale of Norse exploration deep into the heart of North America, far beyond their known settlements in Newfoundland. Translated, it reads, 8 Goths and 22 Norwegians on an exploration journey from Vinland to the west. We had camped by 2 skerries 1 day's journey north from this stone. We were to fish one day. After we came home, we found 10 men red with blood and dead. A VM save us from evil. On the side of the stone is a shorter, supplementary message. Have 10 men by the sea to look after our ship's 14 days' journey from this island. Year 1362, This single stone would push the timeline of European presence in North America back by 130 years before Columbus, suggesting a Norse expedition ventured all the way to the American Midwest, where they met a tragic and violent end. For the local Scandinavian immigrant community, the stone was immediately and passionately embraced as a profound validation of their heritage. It wasn't just a rock, it was a monument proving that their Viking ancestors had walked this same soil centuries before, a tangible link between their old world and their new one. It gave them a deep, historic roots in the American landscape, transforming them from newcomers into inheritors of a grand exploratory tradition. The stone became a source of immense local pride, a symbol around which a community could build its identity. This emotional connection ensured that the runestone's legend would be fiercely protected, regardless of the academic storms to come, and those storms were fierce indeed. From the moment it was presented to scholars, the runestone was met with overwhelming skepticism. Linguists and runologists pointed to a host of problems that screamed of a modern forgery. The runes themselves were a bizarre hybrid, mixing runes from different time periods and geographic locations that no single Norse carver would have ever used together. The language was equally problematic. It was not pure Old Norse, but contained Swedicisms and modern grammatical forms that wouldn't have existed in the 14th century. Phrases like "from this island" made little sense in the landlocked context of Minnesota. To experts, the inscription read less like a genuine medieval text and more like a clumsy attempt by a 19th century Scandinavian to mimic what he thought Old Norse should sound like, using knowledge gleaned from popular history books available at the time. The cultural context of late 19th century Minnesota provides the most likely explanation for the stone's creation. This was an era of massive Scandinavian immigration, a time when these new Americans were forging their identity and often facing discrimination from earlier settlers. There was a powerful cultural movement to assert the virtues and historical importance of the Norse people, to prove they were just as worthy as the English or the Dutch. Within this environment, the creation of a myth that connected them directly to the brave, exploratory Vikings would have been powerfully appealing. Olof Oman himself was an immigrant from Sweden, a man with little formal education but who was known to be intelligent and well-read, with access to books on runes and Scandinavian history. The evidence strongly suggests that Oman, perhaps with the help of others in his community, carved the stone himself as a prank, a piece of local folklore, or perhaps even as a sincere attempt to create a founding myth for his people in their new home. The fact that he discovered it himself, the convenient date of 1362, which echoed the year of a famous Norse battle, and his initial reluctance to seek a financial reward for it, all paint a picture of a local creation rather than a medieval relic. Despite its almost universal rejection by the academic community, the Kensington Runestone has never lost its power. It remains a cherished state icon, displayed in its own museum, and continues to be a subject of fierce debate between a small number of passionate proponents and the vast majority of scholars. This endurance speaks to a truth that goes beyond archaeology. The runestone is more than an artifact, it is a symbol. For the descendants of those Scandinavian immigrants, it represents a story they want to be true, a narrative of bravery, exploration, and deep-rooted belonging in America. It is a testament to the power of folklore and the human need to connect our present to a heroic past, proving that sometimes the most enduring historical mysteries are not about what actually happened, but about the stories we choose to tell about ourselves. Nestled in a quiet park in Newport, Rhode Island, stands a curious circular stone tower that has become a battleground for competing versions of history. With its squat, robust construction and series of arched windows, the Newport Tower looks utterly unlike any other colonial structure in New England, and for over 2 centuries that unique appearance has fueled extraordinary speculation. Could this be the last remaining church built by Norse explorers who ventured south from their Vinland settlement centuries before Columbus sailed? The idea is undeniably romantic, transforming a simple local landmark into a potential gateway to a forgotten past, but the overwhelming weight of evidence tells a far more practical, though no less fascinating, story. The theory of a Norse origin took root in the 19th century, championed by Danish antiquarian Carl Christian Raffan. Proponents point to the tower's architectural features, arguing its design echoes that of round churches from medieval Scandinavia, particularly those like the ones in Orfear, Scotland, which was under Norse influence. They note the use of a central pillar to support the floor above, a method common in Norse architecture, and suggest the alignment of the windows could have served an astronomical purpose for a people known to be skilled navigators. The emotional pull of this narrative is powerful. It suggests a tangible stone and mortar connection to the legendary voyages of Leif Erikson, placing Viking explorers not just on the frigid coast of Newfoundland, but deep in the heart of what would become English colonial territory. However, when subjected to the rigorous tools of modern archaeology and historical documentation, the Viking theory begins to crumble. The most damning evidence comes not from the stones themselves, but from the written record. A clear reference in the will of Rhode Island's first colonial governor, Benedict Arnold, yes, an ancestor of the infamous traitor, leaves his stone-built windmill to his family in 1675. This direct link to Governor Arnold is further supported by colonial-era maps that label the structure as the Old Stone Mill. The architectural style, while unusual, finds its closest parallels not in Scandinavia, but in the vernacular architecture of 17th century England. The specific type of mortar used in its construction has been chemically analyzed and matches other confirmed colonial buildings in the region, not medieval European formulas. The tower's design also makes perfect sense when viewed as a windmill, a vital piece of technology for any fledgling agricultural community. The large central pillar was not for ceremonial purposes, but was the essential main post that supported the entire rotating cap and machinery of the mill. The arches at the base provided a covered work area for receiving grain and flour, protecting it from the elements, while the windows on the upper level allowed the miller to assess wind direction and keep an eye on the weather. This was a functional, pragmatic building engineered for a specific and crucial colonial need. The persistent myth of its Norse origins is a classic case of our desire for a more thrilling history overriding the more mundane, yet thoroughly documented truth. It speaks to a longing for a North American past filled with bold transatlantic explorers, a narrative that can feel more compelling than the slower, more complex story of colonial settlement. Yet, the Newport Tower's journey from a debated artifact to an established colonial relic doesn't strip it of its intrigue. Instead, it becomes a symbol of something else entirely, the very human process of how history is made and remade. It represents the moment when romantic speculation, fueled by a growing national interest in a grander antiquity, collided with hard evidence. The tower stands today not as a mystery but as a lesson. It teaches us that sometimes the real story is right there in the documents, waiting to be read, and that the true history of a place is often found not in legendary connections to distant continents, but in the everyday lives and labors of the people who actually built it. It remains a beloved landmark, not because it was built by Vikings, but because it is a genuine and rare surviving monument to the ingenuity and resilience of America's earliest English settlers. Returning to the perplexing Roman head found deep within a pre-Columbian pyramid at Calixtlahuaca, its existence forces us to confront a much larger and more controversial question. Was this artifact a lone anomaly, or could it be a single piece of a vast, overlooked puzzle pointing to ancient trans-oceanic voyages? The idea that the Romans or any other Old World culture might have reached the Americas long before Columbus is a tantalizing one, and proponents of this theory point to a scattered collection of other enigmatic finds to build their case. Along the eastern coast of North America, for instance, a handful of Roman coins have occasionally turned up in contexts that stir debate, though none with the sealed archaeological provenance of the Tacaxic Calixtlahuaca head. Further south, in the waters off Brazil, the mysterious Parahiba inscription, a stone allegedly bearing a Phoenician text describing a voyage around Africa, has been cited, though most scholars dismiss it as a modern forgery due to stylistic errors in the script. These disparate clues, however faint, paint a picture of an ancient world that might have been far more interconnected than our textbooks allow, a place where a storm-tossed vessel from the Roman Empire could, against all odds, find itself stranded on a distant, unknown shore. Yet proving such fleeting contact archaeologically is an immense challenge, akin to trying to reconstruct a conversation from a single whispered word heard centuries ago. The biggest hurdle is the stark absence of the kind of evidence that typically marks cultural exchange. If the Romans had established any sustained contact with Mesoamerican civilizations, we would expect to find a much richer and more complex material record. Where are the Roman settlements, the pottery shards in stratigraphic layers, the glassware, the metal tools, or the distinctive architectural influences? The head is a compelling object, but it stands alone. A single artifact could have arrived through a multitude of ways. A lone shipwreck, an object traded through a long and convoluted chain of indigenous networks over generations, or even a curio kept by a far-traveling individual. Without corroborating evidence like DNA from Roman remains in American soil, or an undeniable linguistic loanword shared between Latin and Nahuatl, the head remains an isolated data point, an exception to the rule rather than a rule itself. This scarcity of evidence is precisely why the vast majority of mainstream archaeologists remain deeply skeptical of these trans-oceanic contact theories. Their skepticism isn't rooted in a dogmatic refusal to consider new ideas, but in a rigorous methodological principle. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. A discipline built on carefully reconstructing the past from fragments must be cautious of grand narratives built on a foundation of isolated artifacts. They argue that the simplest explanation is often the most likely, and that the simplest explanation for the head is not a rewriting of global maritime history, but some form of post-Columbian contamination. They point to the early 20th century excavation techniques at Calixtlahuaca, which were not as meticulous as modern standards, and suggest the head could have intruded into the ancient context from a higher, more recent layer of soil. Alternatively, it could have been a prized possession of a Spanish colonist, a family heirloom from Europe that was lost or buried in the New World, only to be found centuries later and mistakenly associated with the much older structure it was found near. The debate over the Calixtlahuaca head, therefore, represents a fundamental clash between two ways of seeing the past. On one side is the allure of the paradigm-shifting discovery, the thrilling possibility that history is far more mysterious and wonderful than we know. On the other is the careful, conservative process of academic archaeology, which must weigh each new find against the immense body of existing knowledge. Both perspectives are valuable. The skeptics provide the essential checks and balances that prevent the field from being overrun by speculation, while the open-minded investigators ensure that we remain willing to ask difficult questions and challenge established narratives when a truly anomalous piece of evidence emerges. The head itself remains an enigma, a stone face keeping its secrets silent. It doesn't offer proof, but it does keep a door open, a door to a past where the oceans may not have been the impenetrable barriers we once believed, but highways for the occasional lost voyager whose story is now lost to time. While the main penny stands as a solitary and debated coin, its true significance only emerges when we place it against the backdrop of what we definitively know about Norse voyages to the west. The undeniable anchor point for this entire narrative is the archaeological site of Elance Aux Meadows, located on the northernmost tip of Newfoundland. Discovered in 1960 by the Norwegian explorer Helge Ingstad and his wife, archaeologist Anne Stein Ingstad, this site provided the first and only conclusive proof that Norse feet walked and Norse hands built homes in North America centuries before Columbus. Excavations revealed the foundations of 8 sturdy turf-walled buildings, including a forge for smithing iron and a carpentry workshop, unmistakably Viking in design and confirmed by radiocarbon dating to around the year 1000. This wasn't a temporary camp, it was a small settlement, a base for further exploration that the Norse sagas called Vinland. Understanding Elance Ox Meadows is crucial because it gives us a blueprint for what genuine, undisputed Norse presence looks like. It leaves behind a rich and varied material footprint: iron slag from smithing, a bronze ringed pin for fastening a cloak, a stone oil lamp, and the distinct architectural layout of a Norse hall. This context is precisely what is missing at the Goddard site in Maine where the penny was found. The coin is an outlier, a single data point without the supporting cultural evidence that would confirm a Norse settlement or even a sustained trading post. So if the Norse had a functioning base in Newfoundland, how far south did they actually venture? The sagas, the epic poems that recount these voyages, speak of explorations further down the coast to regions rich with grapes and lumber, places they named Helluland, Markland, and Vinland. These descriptions have led historians and archaeologists to hypothesize that the Norse likely explored the Gulf of St. Lawrence and perhaps the coasts of New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and even down into the Maine region. This is where the Maine penny becomes so electrifying for the field. It represents the tantalizing possibility of finding that elusive, smoking gun, evidence of travel beyond their main base. A single coin could have traveled far from its point of origin through trade networks between indigenous groups. It might have been a curious trinket, passed from hand to hand over hundreds of miles and many years, eventually finding its way into the shell midden in Maine. This would make it an incredible find in its own right, evidence of the vast and interconnected trade routes that existed among Native American tribes long before European settlement. However, the more radical and thrilling possibility is that the coin was lost by a Norse explorer themselves, perhaps a small group that sailed south from Newfoundland, interacting directly with the Penobscot people. This scenario suggests that the Norse exploration of North America was more extensive than our current archaeological record can prove. The controversy surrounding the penny, and indeed any isolated Norse artifact found beyond Elance Ox Meadows, stems from this very tension between tantalizing possibility and scientific rigor. Archaeologists require a pattern of evidence to confirm a hypothesis. A single artifact, especially one discovered by amateurs without the precise context of professional stratigraphic excavation, is inherently suspect. It could be a hoax, an accidental loss from a modern collector, or an object that was displaced from its original context by natural processes. To accept it as proof of Norse presence requires a leap of faith that the discipline is rightly cautious to take. Yet, it is this same caution that makes such discoveries so exciting. They are puzzles that challenge the boundaries of our accepted history, pushing researchers to look harder, dig deeper, and remain open to the idea that the map of the past is still missing significant details. The Maine penny, whether a genuine Norse artifact lost on a distant shore or a later anomaly, continues to symbolize that spirit of exploration and the enduring mystery of what might still be hidden just beneath our feet. These massive stone spheres, some weighing over 16 tons, are marvels of precision and patience, carved from a single piece of hard igneous rock like gabbro or granodiorite. The Diquís culture, which flourished from around 800 AD until the Spanish conquest, created them using a technique that combined controlled fracture with meticulous abrasion. They likely identified a suitable boulder, used heat to crack away large portions of unwanted stone, and then painstakingly shaped the sphere using other rocks as hammers and abrasives, possibly with the aid of wooden tools and sand over a period that could have spanned years. The near-perfect roundness they achieved, with margins of error of less than a centimeter even on the largest examples, is a testament to an incredible understanding of stoneworking and geometry, achieved without the aid of metal tools, lasers, or blueprints. Their purpose remains one of Central America's most captivating archaeological puzzles, with theories ranging from the practical to the celestial. Some researchers propose they were powerful status symbols, placed in prominent plazas or near the homes of chiefs to denote wealth, power, and lineage. The sheer effort required to create and move them would have made them potent symbols of a leader's ability to command labor and resources. Other theories suggest a more functional, yet equally sophisticated purpose, that they were arranged in specific alignments to act as astronomical observatories, marking solstices, equinoxes, or other celestial events to guide agricultural cycles and religious ceremonies. This idea is fueled by the fact that many spheres were found in groups, though their original arrangements were sadly disrupted by centuries of farming and looting. A more esoteric theory posits that the spheres were markers or signposts, perhaps guiding travelers along ancient routes or demarcating territorial boundaries between different chiefdoms. Their imposing presence would have conveyed a clear message of authority to anyone entering a particular area. Yet another perspective views them through a purely spiritual lens, suggesting they represented celestial bodies like the sun or moon, or were conceived as containers of powerful spiritual energy, serving as focal points for ritual and community gathering. The truth is that no single theory holds definitive proof, and it is highly likely that the spheres held multiple layers of meaning. Their function could have evolved over time or differed from one village to another, serving as both a practical calendar and a symbol of political power simultaneously. The greatest tragedy surrounding the Diquís Spheres is the loss of their original context. When the spheres were rediscovered in the 1930s during the United Fruit Company's clearing of land for banana plantations, hundreds were dynamited or bulldozed out of the way, or looted to become lawn ornaments in the gardens of wealthy landowners. This destruction irrevocably severed the spheres from their archaeological settings, robbing us of the clues their placement and groupings could have provided. Today, they stand as silent, magnificent sentinels, their perfect forms a haunting reminder of a sophisticated culture's advanced skill and the enduring mystery of what they were truly meant to say to the future. Leaving behind the colossal stone spheres of Costa Rica, we soar high above the coastal deserts of southern Peru, where one of the world's most breathtaking and enigmatic archaeological wonders is etched into the very floor of the planet. This is the home of the Nazca Lines, a sprawling gallery of giant geoglyphs that transforms 600 square miles of arid plateau into a canvas of staggering scale and mystery. Unlike any artifact we've encountered so far, these are not objects to be held or displayed in a museum. They are a monumental landscape art, an integral part of the Earth itself, designed on a scale so vast its full majesty can only be comprehended from the vantage point of the sky. Created by the Nazca culture between 200 BC and 600 AD, these lines form hundreds of individual figures, from perfectly straight lines that run for miles to intricate designs of animals, plants, and mythical beings. A hummingbird with wings outstretched, a spider with precisely angled legs, a killer whale, a monkey with a spiraling tail, each one is a masterpiece of proportion and geometry, executed with a precision that seems to defy their ancient origin. The method of their creation is a testament to the ingenuity and determination of the Nazca people. They did not build these images up with stones. They carved them out by meticulously removing the top layer of dark, sun-baked pebbles to reveal the contrasting light-colored sand beneath. This simple yet effective technique created a stark, visual contrast that has endured for nearly 2,000 years, preserved by the region's unique climate, one of the driest places on Earth, with minimal rain or wind to erode the carefully arranged surfaces. The true engineering marvel, however, lies in their flawless proportions. How did the Nazca artists achieve such perfect symmetry and scale without ever seeing their work from above? The prevailing theory is that they used a system of scaled models and a simple grid system. They could have designed a small-scale version of a figure on a grid, and then teams of workers could have transferred that grid onto the desert floor using stakes and ropes, enlarging the design to its monumental size one square at a time. This method demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of mathematics and project management, a communal effort that likely held deep spiritual and social significance for the entire culture. This brings us to the central, tantalizing question: why did they go to such extraordinary effort for a people who could never fly? What was the purpose of creating art that only the gods could see? One of the most enduring and academically supported theories is that the lines were part of a vast astronomical calendar connecting to celestial events. Researcher Maria Reich, who dedicated her life to studying and preserving the lines, proposed that many of the long, straight lines pointed directly to the position of the sun, moon, and stars on the horizon during solstices and equinoxes. In this view, the desert was a gigantic observatory, its markings used to track the passing seasons and predict the arrival of life-giving rains, which were crucial for agriculture in such an unforgiving environment. The animal figures might have represented constellations, mapping the heavens onto the earth in a grand cosmological diagram. A second major theory posits a deeply ritualistic function, directly tied to the Nazca's spirituality and their desperate need for water. Many of the lines form clear pathways, and the act of walking these paths may have been a form of pilgrimage or a ceremonial procession. Archaeologists have found ancient pottery and ceremonial platforms at the endpoints of some lines, suggesting they were sites for making offerings to the deities. In a culture that worshipped mountain and sky gods believed to control rainfall, these processions could have been desperate pleas for water. The figures themselves might have been spirit animals or deities, and by walking their forms, the Nazca people might have been attempting to summon their power and influence. The lines, in this sense, were not just art, they were a central component of a ritual landscape, a sacred interface between the human world and the divine. Of course, the Nazca Lines' most famous modern interpretation is also the most controversial, the ancient astronaut theory. Popularized in the 1960s, this idea suggests the lines were landing strips or navigational markers for extraterrestrial spacecraft. Proponents point to the need for an aerial view to appreciate them and the straightness of the lines, which they argue could only be achieved with advanced technology. While a captivating sci-fi narrative, this theory is overwhelmingly rejected by archaeologists. It not only ignores the simple, demonstrable techniques the Nazca people had at their disposal, but it also commits a great disservice to their culture by stripping them of their own intellectual and artistic achievement. The alien explanation is a classic example of imposing a modern, technological framework onto an ancient people, rather than seeking to understand their world through their own beliefs, capabilities, and environmental challenges. The lines are a testament to human ingenuity, not extraterrestrial intervention. The enduring power of the Nazca Lines lies in this beautiful convergence of the knowable and the mysterious. We can understand how they were made, and we have strong, evidence-based theories about why. Yet, standing on the edge of the plane or looking down from a plane, one cannot shake a profound sense of awe. These geoglyphs are a permanent message from the past, a declaration of faith, creativity, and an intimate connection with the cosmos. They represent a civilization that looked at a vast, empty desert and saw not a wasteland, but a sacred space, a canvas upon which they could inscribe their hopes, their fears, and their profound understanding of the world around them. They remind us that the greatest mysteries are not always about lost technology or impossible travel, but about the timeless human drive to create meaning, to reach for the heavens, and to leave a mark on the world so immense it would echo for millennia. Yet for every complex system posited, there are equally compelling voices arguing that the manuscript is an elaborate and brilliant deception. The hoax theory suggests that the Voynich manuscript is a synthetic text, a collection of meaningless but cleverly constructed glyphs designed to mimic the appearance of a real language. The most famous proponent of this idea was the book dealer Wilfrid Voynich himself, who some believe had the motive and opportunity to create such a forgery to sell to a wealthy collector. Others point to historical figures like the English polymath and suspected charlatan Edward Kelly, who, along with his partner John Dee, was known to dabble in the occult and could have fabricated the book to swindle a European noble. A successful hoax would explain why the text resists all decipherment, because there is no underlying message to be found. The patterns we observe in this view are not linguistic rules but the natural outcome of a methodical human hand creating a convincing illusion of language, much like a comedian speaking in believable but entirely fictional gibberish. This debate between code and hoax has been the central battleground for a century, but recent scientific analysis has at least managed to anchor the physical book itself in a specific time period, even if its meaning remains adrift. In 2009, researchers at the University of Arizona performed radiocarbon dating on a few tiny samples of the vellum pages. The results were definitive. The parchment was made between 1404 and 1438. This places the manuscript's creation firmly in the early 15th century, decades before Columbus sailed to the Americas and a time when the Renaissance was just beginning to flower in Italy. This finding instantly invalidated theories that placed it in the later 16th century or that attributed it to Roger Bacon in the 13th century, as the vellum simply wasn't old enough. Furthermore, analysis of the inks by Macrone Associates in Chicago found that their composition was consistent with those used in the 15th century, showing no anachronisms that would point to a modern forgery. The book is unquestionably a genuine medieval artifact, but this scientific validation only deepens the central mystery. If it is a real 15th century object, then what exactly is it? The hoax theory is not entirely negated by the dating. It simply means that if it is a hoax, it is a contemporary one, crafted in the 1400s to deceive a patron of the time. Yet, the immense effort involved the years of labor to prepare the vellum, mix the inks, and paint hundreds of elaborate illustrations seems extraordinarily excessive for a mere prank. This returns weight to the idea that it was a meaningful, albeit lost, scientific or magical endeavor. Perhaps it represents the work of a lone, eccentric thinker, someone operating outside the mainstream scholarly traditions of the day. Maybe it was an attempt to encode a radical or heretical idea, not just in cipher, but in an entirely new written language designed to protect its secrets from the eyes of the church. The illustrations could then be a deliberate red herring, a layer of misdirection to make the book appear to be a benign herbal or astronomical text while its true purpose was far more dangerous. The Voynich manuscript stands as the ultimate palimpsest of human curiosity, a blank slate upon which each generation projects its own hopes, fears, and technological capabilities. For cryptographers, it is the ultimate puzzle, a Mount Everest of codes waiting to be cracked. For historians, it is a frustrating and tantalizing gap in our understanding of the medieval mind. For romantics, it is a ghost of a lost world, a beautiful artifact whose truth is forever just beyond our grasp. Its power lies not in any answer it provides, but in the profound and enduring silence it maintains. It is a perfect closed system of wonder, a reminder that even in our age of information, some pages from the past remain steadfastly, beautifully, and eternally unturned. Far out in the vast expanse of the South Pacific, on one of the most isolated inhabited islands on Earth, stand the silent, stoic sentinels of a vanished world. This is Rapa Nui, known to most as Easter Island, and its landscape is dominated by nearly 900 massive stone statues called Moai. With their heavy brows, long ears, and prominent noses, they gaze inland with a silent intensity that has captivated and bewildered the world for centuries. These are not merely sculptures, they are monumental expressions of faith, power, and profound cultural belief. And their creation on such a remote outpost represents one of humanity's most staggering engineering achievements. The most awe-inspiring aspect of the Moai is not just their size. Some tower over 30 feet tall and weigh more than 80 tons, but the incredible journey they undertook from the quarry to their final ceremonial platforms, known as ahu, often miles away across rugged terrain. For generations, the method of their transport was archaeology's greatest parlor trick. How could a society with no wheels, no draft animals, and no metal tools move colossi of solid basalt rock across the island? The romantic, long-held theory involved a scene of desperate societal collapse, where a population recklessly deforested their island to create networks of logs to roll these giants, ultimately leading to their own ecological and cultural ruin. This narrative of ecocide became a cautionary tale for the entire planet, a stark warning about the perils of environmental mismanagement. However, recent archaeological work has completely upended this simplistic story, revealing a far more nuanced and ingenious reality. The prevailing theory now, strongly supported by experimental archaeology, is that the Rapa Nui people didn't use logs at all. Instead, they walked the statues. Using a system of ropes and coordinated teams, they would have carefully rocked the Moai from side to side, edging it forward centimeter by centimeter in an upright position. This method, far from being a desperate act, demonstrates an incredible understanding of physics and a highly organized social structure capable of mobilizing and feeding large groups of people for a common spiritual goal. The Moai were not vanity projects, they were the central focus of a competitive yet collaborative culture. Each statue or Moai represented a deified ancestor, and they were believed to hold supernatural power called mana. By erecting larger and more impressive statues on their clan's ahu platform, each family group was competing for spiritual prestige and ensuring prosperity for their community. The scale of the operation was immense. The main quarry at Rono Roroku is a hillside pockmarked with partially finished statues, a snapshot of production frozen in time. The largest Moai ever attempted, nicknamed El Gigant, remains attached to the bedrock, an unfinished giant measuring 69 feet long and weighing an estimated 270 tons, a breathtaking testament to the ambition that drove this society. This leads to the second great mystery of Rapa Nui, the collapse. The traditional narrative tells of a society that grew too ambitious, cutting down every last palm tree to move statues, which led to soil erosion, the loss of canoe-building materials, and ultimately starvation, warfare, and a dramatic population decline. While it is undeniable that the island was largely deforested and that the society underwent a profound transformation, the story is not one of a simple, self-inflicted suicide. The arrival of Europeans in the 18th century introduced devastating new variables, diseases to which the islanders had no immunity, violent slave raids that abducted thousands, and the introduction of sheep that further degraded the landscape. These external shocks, combined with the existing environmental pressures, were likely the primary drivers of the societal breakdown that followed. The cultural response to this upheaval was not surrender but adaptation. The old system of ancestor worship centered on the Moai gradually gave way to a new religious and social order, the Birdman cult or Tangata Manu. This annual competition, which involved retrieving a sacred tern egg from a treacherous offshore islet, shifted the focus from ancestral lineage to individual prowess and a connection to the god Makemake. The Moai were gradually toppled, many by rival clans in periods of conflict, their gaze toward the villages broken. They lay dormant for centuries, their purpose forgotten, becoming the haunting icons of mystery we see today. So what do the Moai truly represent? They are not merely symbols of a mysterious collapse, but monuments to incredible human ingenuity, resilience, and adaptation. They stand as a powerful reminder of the complex relationship between people and their environment. The story of Rapa Nui is not a simple fable of ecocide, but a far more human story of a people who achieved something breathtakingly magnificent with the resources they had, who faced a series of catastrophic challenges both internal and external, and who ultimately found a way to change and persevere. The Moai remind us that all cultures evolve, that beliefs shift, and that the greatest monuments we build are not just made of stone, but of the collective spirit and ambition of a community striving to make its mark on the world and to connect with something greater than itself. Transitioning from the enigmatic Moai, our journey now takes us to the forested hills of central Bosnia, where a modern controversy has erupted around a cluster of spherical stones that some have hailed as the most significant archaeological find of the century. In the town of Zavodovicai, Semir Osmanagic, a Bosnian-American businessman with a passion for alternative history, has promoted the existence of what he calls the Bosnian stone spheres. These rounded rock formations, some measuring over 10 feet in diameter, are presented as evidence of a lost, highly advanced civilization that once thrived in the Balkans over 12,000 years ago. Osmanagic, who also claims to have discovered ancient pyramids in the nearby Visoko Valley, argues that these spheres are man-made artifacts, their perfect shape and composition proving the existence of a sophisticated society with technology that predates and rivals that of the ancient Egyptians or Sumerians. This narrative, filled with the promise of reclaiming a glorious, forgotten national heritage, quickly captured the public imagination, transforming a small Bosnian town into an international destination for enthusiasts of the unexplained. However, when geologists and professional archaeologists were called in to examine these objects, a far more mundane explanation emerged. The scientific consensus is overwhelming and clear. The Bosnian stone spheres are not the handiwork of a lost civilization, but a fascinating and entirely natural geological phenomenon known as concretion. Concretions form over millions of years when mineral cement precipitates and hardens around a nucleus within sedimentary rock. As the surrounding softer rock erodes away due to weather and time, these harder, cemented spheres are left behind. The process is a common one, with similar spherical concretions found all over the world, from the Moaraki boulders in New Zealand to the Kautu boulders in New Zealand, and even in the sandstone of the American Southwest. The specific geology of the Bosnia region, rich in minerals, provided the perfect conditions for these large concretions to form. Analysis of the stone itself shows no evidence of tool marks, quarrying, or any form of human manipulation that would distinguish them from their natural counterparts found across the globe. This clash between a sensational historical claim and a settled scientific explanation reveals a story that is less about ancient history and more about the powerful forces that shape our understanding of the past today. The promotion of the spheres is a textbook example of pseudo-archaeology, a field that ignores the established methodologies of archaeology in favor of spectacular claims that are often driven by other motives. In this case, the drive is a potent mix of nationalism and economic opportunity. For a region still healing from the wounds of a brutal civil war, the idea of being home to the oldest pyramids and the most perfect stone spheres in the world offers a powerful source of national pride and a new, positive identity built on a narrative of ancient importance. Furthermore, the influx of tourists and media attention provides a much-needed economic boost, creating a strong incentive for local communities and officials to embrace the narrative, regardless of the scientific evidence against it. The controversy surrounding the Bosnian stone spheres serves as a crucial modern case study in how history can be weaponized and repackaged for contemporary goals. It highlights the tension between a desire for magical, transformative discoveries and the slow, careful, and often less glamorous work of scientific inquiry. While the spheres themselves are natural wonders, their story is a human one, demonstrating our enduring need to find meaning and grandeur in the landscape around us, and a cautionary tale about the perils of letting that desire override empirical evidence and academic rigor. While many of the artifacts we've explored are ancient puzzles, one of the most intriguing enigmas was born squarely in the modern era, a mystery constructed not by a lost civilization, but by an individual hiding behind a calculated veil of secrecy. In 1980, in a remote pasture in Elbert County, Georgia, a curious construction project concluded. A local granite finishing company, acting on behalf of a well-dressed, articulate stranger who called himself simply R.C. Christian, had erected a massive set of slabs, a structure that would soon be dubbed the Georgia Guidestones. Standing over 19 feet tall and weighing more than 100 tons, the monument consisted of 4 major upright stones capped by a massive lintel stone, all precisely aligned with astronomical features and engraved with a message for humanity in 8 different modern languages: English, Spanish, Swahili, Hindi, Hebrew, Arabic, Chinese, and Russian. A shorter message was also inscribed in 4 ancient scripts: Babylonian cuneiform, Classical Greek, Sanskrit, and Egyptian hieroglyphics. This was not a relic of the distant past. It was a modern artifact deliberately designed to speak across time, and its message would ignite decades of intense speculation, admiration, and fiery controversy. The core of the mystery and the primary fuel for countless theories was the identity of the man behind it all, R.C. Christian. This was clearly a pseudonym, a nod to the legendary 14th century founder of the Rosicrucian order, Christian Rosencreutz, a figure shrouded in occult lore. The man provided the granite company with a detailed model and precise specifications, paid for the substantial project with funds drawn from a local bank, and then vanished completely, never to be identified. His stated purpose, as recounted by those who dealt with him, was to create a compass for a future society that might emerge from the ashes of a global catastrophe, a set of guidelines to help humanity rebuild a peaceful and sustainable civilization. The anonymity was intentional, meant to focus attention solely on the message itself, not the messenger. Yet this very secrecy became a blank screen onto which a terrified and fascinated public projected their deepest fears and suspicions. Was R.C. Christian a wealthy eccentric, a forward-thinking philanthropist, a prophet, or the representative of a shadowy globalist cabal with a sinister agenda for world control? The lack of a definitive answer ensured that the Guidestones would forever be a Rorschach test, their meaning shifting dramatically depending on who was looking at them. And then there was the message itself, 10 guiding principles etched into the granite that were as pragmatic as they were provocative. They called for maintaining humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature, a stark number that implied a catastrophic depopulation from our current billions. They advocated for guiding reproduction wisely, improving fitness and diversity. They spoke of unifying humanity with a living new language, ruling with tempered reason and passion, and protecting people and nations with fair laws and just courts. To some, these were noble, rational, and ecologically sound principles, a necessary blueprint for survival on a finite planet. Environmentalists and humanists saw a call for stewardship, sustainability, and global cooperation. They pointed to the astronomical alignments, a hole drilled through one stone to point at the North Star, a slot aligned with the sun's solstices and equinoxes as evidence of a deep connection to natural cycles, a plea to live in harmony with the cosmos. For countless others, however, the same words sounded a chilling, dystopian alarm. The call to cap the global population at 500 million was interpreted not as a goal for a distant future, but as a thinly veiled endorsement of eugenics or even genocide to achieve that number. The advice to guide reproduction wisely sounded to many like a mandate for authoritarian control over human fertility. The mention of a new language and internationalism fueled fears of a planned eradication of national sovereignty and cultural identity, a one-world government imposed from above. The guidestones became a potent symbol for conspiracy theorists, Christian fundamentalists, and anti-globalist activists, who saw in its granite face the cold, hard commandments of a secular, scientific elite that valued planetary management over human life and individual freedom. It was decried as a 10 Commandments of the Antichrist and satanic altar and a monument to the New World Order. This polarization transformed the quiet Georgia field into a pilgrimage site for two opposing groups, those who came to ponder its message of hope and those who came to protest what they saw as a monument to evil. This simmering cauldron of controversy finally boiled over in the summer of 2022. Early on the morning of July 6th, a massive explosion ripped through the site, severely damaging one of the upright slabs. Later that day, citing public safety concerns, authorities demolished the entire structure. The act of destruction was as mysterious as the monument's creation. While a suspect was eventually identified, the motives behind the bombing remained murky, though it was widely seen as the violent culmination of years of heated rhetoric and threats from those who viewed the stones as a profound threat. Their destruction, however, did not erase the mystery, it only deepened it. The rubble was cleared away, but the questions remained louder than ever. The Georgia Guidestones had completed a breathtakingly rapid journey from modern monument to archaeological artifact. In just 42 years, they had been conceived, built, debated, vilified, and destroyed. They now exist primarily as photographs, videos, and fragments, a modern-day ruin whose true purpose and meaning are destined to be debated for generations to come. A perfect example of how quickly our own creations can become the baffling relics of tomorrow. Among the sun-baked ruins of the Minoan palace of Phaistos on the island of Crete, an Italian archaeologist named Luigi Pernia made a discovery in 1908 that would become one of the most enduring linguistic puzzles of the ancient world. In a basement cell of an outbuilding, buried amidst broken pottery and charcoal in a layer of earth dated to the 2nd millennium BC, he unearthed a perfectly preserved, hand-formed clay disc about 6 inches in diameter. Both of its faces were covered, from the outer edge spiraling tightly into the center, with a series of 45 distinct symbols, each one not drawn or carved, but cleanly stamped into the soft clay before it was fired. This is the Phaistos disc, and it is utterly unique. No other object like it, with its peculiar stamped symbols, has ever been found anywhere in the world. It is a solitary, silent message from the heart of the Minoan world, a locked door for which we have never found the key. The disc's mystery is multifaceted. First, there are the symbols themselves, a menagerie of human figures, birds, fish, insects, plants, and abstract shapes like shields and arrows. These aren't the graceful, flowing lines of the later Linear A and Linear B scripts found elsewhere in Crete. These are pictorial, almost hieroglyphic in nature, yet they were produced with movable type, a technology for printing that would not appear again until the 15th century in East Asia and the 17th century in Europe. This fact alone is staggering. It suggests the Minoans, a Bronze Age civilization, possessed a concept of reusable type for impressing text, a revolutionary idea that seemingly vanished without a trace for over 3,000 years. The disc contains 241 individual impressions, arranged in 61 groups that are separated by vertical incised lines, suggesting words or phrases. The text flows from the outer edge inward, and the presence of a small group of 5 signs on the face that appears slightly smoothed has led some to speculate it might be a dedication, a signature, or even the disc's title. For over a century, the greatest minds in linguistics, cryptography, and archaeology have tried to break its code, and the result has been a spectacular graveyard of failed theories. The fundamental problem is the disc's isolation. In cryptography, to decode an unknown script, you need what is called a Rosetta Stone, another text that says the same thing in a known language to provide a key. The Phaistos disc has no parallel text. Every attempted decipherment is therefore built on a foundation of assumption. Some researchers believe the symbols represent a syllabary, where each sign stands for a syllable like ta or ro. Others argue it is logographic, with each symbol representing an entire word or concept. There have been attempts to link it to ancient Greek, to Hittite, to Semitic languages, and even to Basque. One researcher proposed it was a geometric theorem, while another famously declared it an ancient board game. The most creative and widely ridiculed theory came from a German researcher who claimed it was a calendar for tracking the pregnancy of a Minoan goddess, with the symbols representing days and their associated rituals. The sheer variety of these interpretations, many of which produce completely different and mutually exclusive translations, reveals less about the disc and more about our own desperate desire to project meaning onto its inscrutable surface. This long history of fruitless effort has led a minority of scholars to propose a far more radical and controversial explanation, that the Phaistos disc is not ancient at all but an elaborate hoax. The skeptics, most notably the renowned archaeologist Jerome Eisenberg, point to several troubling anomalies. The disc was found by a single excavator, Luigi Pernier, without any independent witnesses to its precise context in the ground. Its perfect preservation is unusual for a clay object buried for 3,500 years. It shows no significant weathering or damage, but the most damning evidence for the skeptics is its absolute uniqueness. If the Minoans had developed movable type, why have we never found any other examples? No other stamped texts, no fragments of type, no imprints on other clay tablets. In the world of archaeology, an object without parallels is always treated with heightened suspicion. The theory posits that Pernier, perhaps seeking fame or wanting to play a prank on his colleagues, created the disc himself, impressing it with symbols inspired by other Minoan artifacts and then planting it at the site. While this theory is not accepted by most, it persists as a nagging doubt, a ghost in the machine of Minoan studies. Whether genuine artifact or brilliant fake, the Phaistos disc holds a powerful lesson about the limits of our knowledge. It is a stark reminder of how much of the ancient world is simply lost, its voices silenced forever. The Minoans were a vibrant, powerful, and sophisticated civilization, yet we cannot read their primary religious texts if they wrote them. We do not know what they called their cities, and we are not even certain what they called themselves. The disc could be a royal decree, a religious hymn, a story, a list of offerings, or a merchant's inventory. Without a key, we may never know. It stands as the ultimate symbol of the gap between the past and the present, a single, beautiful object that encapsulates all we can uncover about ancient cultures and all that remains forever beyond our grasp. It is not merely an undeciphered text, it is a metaphor for the human endeavor of history itself. A humbling reminder that for all our technology and intellect, some doors from the past may remain permanently closed, their secrets kept safe for all time. Yet even with the carbon dating results published, the debate was far from settled. For many of the faithful, science had not solved the mystery, it had simply deepened it. They pointed to a host of other enigmatic properties that, in their view, no medieval forger could possibly have replicated. The image on the shroud is not a painting. There are no pigments, no brush strokes, no outline. It is a superficial discoloration only on the very topmost fibers of the threads, an effect science has never been able to fully reproduce. The anatomical precision is startlingly accurate for the 14th century, depicting details of a Roman crucifixion that were not fully understood by historians until the modern era. The blood stains, analyzed as type B, show a real serum halo around them, a forensic detail a forger would have no knowledge of. And then there is the question of how the image was formed at all. Some have proposed it was the result of a rare chemical reaction between a body's amines and the carbohydrate layer of the linen. Others, looking for a more miraculous explanation, point to theories of a brief, intense burst of radiation, a flash of light from a divine resurrection, that somehow scorched the cloth with a perfect photographic negative. This theory, while scientifically speculative, captures the essence of the shroud's enduring power. It represents a moment where the physical and the metaphysical seem to collide. The Shroud of Turin, therefore, stands at a perfect and permanent crossroads. It is a physical object that has been subjected to the rigors of empirical science, yet its true nature seems to slip through the grasp of every methodology applied to it. For skeptics, it is a fascinating medieval artifact, a testament to the incredible, though anonymous, skill of an artist or inventor who created a relic of breathtaking ingenuity, one that fooled millions and continues to inspire debate centuries later. For believers, it is an article of faith that exists beyond the reach of carbon-14 dating, a sacred icon that provides tangible evidence for the central event of their religion. Its power lies in its ambiguity. It refuses to offer a final, conclusive answer, instead holding both possibilities in a delicate, unresolved tension. It is not merely a piece of cloth. It is a mirror reflecting our own deepest questions about history, belief, and the limits of human understanding, a silent witness to a mystery that may forever remain just beyond the edge of proof. Of all the artifacts that blur the line between ancient mystery and modern desire, few are as visually captivating as the crystal skulls. Carved from a single block of clear or milky quartz, these hauntingly beautiful objects feature a fully sculpted human skull, often with a mesmerizing, almost liquid clarity that seems to capture and play with light. For over a century, they were presented as priceless pre-Columbian relics, artifacts of a lost age with incredible mystical powers. The most famous among them, the Mitchell Hedges skull, was said to have been discovered by adventurer F. A. Mitchell Hedges in 1924, deep within a temple in the lost Maya city of Lubonton in Belize. The story told was one of high adventure. As the sun hit the altar on the final day of his expedition, his daughter Anna saw a flash of light and unearthed the perfectly carved skull. It was described as possessing otherworldly qualities. It could cause visions, make sounds, and even influence the health of those around it. This narrative, filled with romance and the allure of the unknown, cemented the crystal skull's place in popular culture as a genuine enigma, a tangible piece of magic from a forgotten world. This mythology was supercharged by the fervor of the New Age movement in the latter half of the 20th century. The skulls were not just artifacts, they were seen as vessels of ancient wisdom, cosmic computers holding the secrets of Atlantis and Lemuria. Proponents believed the skulls could channel healing energy, amplify psychic abilities, and even facilitate communication with extraterrestrial beings. They were the centerpieces of spiritual gatherings, used in meditation and rituals, and became icons for a generation seeking alternative spirituality and a deeper, more mystical connection to indigenous cultures. Their appeal was universal, tapping into a collective fascination with both the macabre and the divine. This cultural moment reached its zenith with their prominent featuring in blockbuster entertainment, most notably the film Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which further enshrined their legend in the global imagination and presented their ancient extraterrestrial origin as a thrilling possibility. However, the truth behind these enigmatic objects is far less mystical, though no less fascinating. The veil began to lift in the early 1990s when an enterprising researcher named Jane McLaren Walsh from the Smithsonian Institution began a serious investigation into their origins. Her inquiry was sparked by the anonymous delivery of a crystal skull to the Smithsonian itself, accompanied by a note claiming it was an Aztec artifact. Walsh, in collaboration with Margaret Sachs of the British Museum, subjected the major crystal skulls in museum collections, including the one at the British Museum and the famous Mitchell Hedges skull, to rigorous scientific analysis. Using scanning electron microscopes, they looked for telltale signs of how the quartz was worked. The results were definitive and damning. The surfaces of the skulls were covered in the perfectly parallel, symmetrical grooves left by rotating wheels coated in industrial diamonds, a technology that simply did not exist in the Americas before the arrival of Europeans. Authentic Mesoamerican carvings in hard stone, by contrast, show marks from handheld tools abraded with sand and water, a much slower and less precise process. The skulls were unequivocally modern creations, likely carved in Europe, probably in Germany's Idar-Oberstein region, which was a renowned center for quartz carving in the 19th century and had the precise lapidary equipment needed for such work. The revelation that these prized relics were 19th century fakes did little to dim their popularity in certain circles, and this persistence reveals a profound truth about our relationship with the past. The crystal skulls are a powerful case study in the economics of belief. The 19th century was a golden age for the creation of fake antiquities, driven by a booming market of European and American collectors who were eager to own a piece of the exotic and mysterious New World. Skilled forgers, understanding this demand, produced a flood of objects that catered directly to the romantic expectations of their clients. The crystal skulls were the ultimate product of this environment, objects that perfectly matched the Western fantasy of what an ancient Mesoamerican religious artifact should look like: mystical, slightly sinister, and utterly alien. They were not based on any genuine archaeological finds, as no crystal skulls have ever been excavated from a documented, professionally studied pre-Columbian site. Ultimately, the enduring legacy of the crystal skulls is not about ancient astronauts or lost civilizations. It is about us. They hold up a mirror to our deep and enduring desire to find magic in the material world, to connect with a past that feels more wise and spiritually attuned than our own modern existence. They speak to the power of a good story over dry archaeological fact, and the potent allure of an object that seems to offer a direct line to the mysterious and the divine. Even with their provenance thoroughly debunked, they continue to be cherished by many as objects of meditation and spiritual focus, proving that an artifact's true power often lies not in its historical origin, but in the meaning and wonder we, as humans, choose to project upon it. They are a beautiful, complicated lie that tells a very true story about our timeless need for mystery. But for all the grandeur of these famous sites, perhaps no modern archaeological claim has been more sweeping or more controversial than the one emerging from a heavily forested hill in West Java, Indonesia. This is Gunung Padang, a site that on the surface appears to be a series of ancient terraced megalithic steps, a place locals have long considered sacred. But according to a team led by geologist Danny Hillman Natawajoja, this hill is not just a hill. They propose that Gunung Padang is in fact the world's oldest pyramid, a colossal, man-made structure whose construction began an astonishing 20,000 years ago during the last ice age. If true, this would not just rewrite history, it would shatter it, suggesting a sophisticated, organized civilization capable of monumental architecture at a time when humanity was supposedly comprised of small bands of hunter-gatherers. The implications are so profound that they challenge the very narrative of human progress. The core of this radical claim rests on geological surveys conducted at the site, primarily using ground-penetrating radar, seismic tomography, and electrical resistivity imaging. These techniques allow scientists to see beneath the surface, creating a three-dimensional map of what lies below. The data from these surveys revealed something intriguing. What looks like a natural hill seems to contain deep internal structures. The team identified what they interpret as multiple layers or chambers, with some elements extending over 100 feet down. They also point to core samples drilled from the hill that retrieved what they claim are man-made artifacts, columnar rocks, and a kind of concrete-like binder from deep within the earth, carbon dated to be thousands of years old. The most extreme dates proposed suggest the deepest layers could be more than 20,000 years old, with further construction phases occurring around 11,000 and 4,500 years ago. This timeline would place the origins of Gunung Padang in the Paleolithic era, making it exponentially older than Stonehenge, the Egyptian pyramids, or Göbekli Tepe. However, this interpretation has been met with fierce and nearly universal opposition from the broader archaeological and geological communities. The central criticism is that the team is grossly misinterpreting natural geological formations as evidence of human handiwork. The hill at Gunung Padang is primarily composed of andesite, a type of volcanic rock that naturally fractures into sharp, columnar blocks and angular shards. Geologists argue that the walls, chambers, and tunnels identified by the pyramid proponents are almost certainly the result of natural weathering and volcanic processes. The cracks and fractures that create these blocky shapes are a common feature in volcanic landscapes, not a sign of architectural planning. Furthermore, the so-called concrete or binder material is explained by critics as a natural weathering product called paleosol, a type of old, hardened soil that can form in between rocks over immense geological timescales. The carbon dating, while perhaps accurate for organic material found in the cores, doesn't date the construction of the hill itself. It simply dates old soil or plant material that naturally seeped into the cracks and cavities of the volcanic rock over millennia. In the view of most mainstream scientists, the team is finding exactly what you would expect to find in a weathered volcanic hill: a complex, messy, natural interior. They are then imposing an artificial, human narrative onto these natural features. This scientific debate is further complicated by powerful non-scientific forces, intense nationalism and political ambition. The idea that Indonesia might be home to the oldest civilization on Earth is an incredibly potent narrative. It fosters a sense of national pride and exceptionalism, offering a glorious, ancient identity that can be a unifying force for the country. This appeal has captured the interest of high-level government officials, including former Indonesian President Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, who threw his support behind the excavation project, declaring it a matter of national importance. This top-down endorsement created a situation where the scientific process was potentially influenced by political desire. Funding and permits flowed more readily to the team promoting the extraordinary claim, while the voices of skeptical archaeologists were often marginalized or dismissed as being unpatriotic or beholden to Western academic paradigms that seek to downplay non-Western achievements. The controversy at Gunung Padang thus becomes a classic case of how the pursuit of a proud national history can sometimes collide with, and potentially override, the slow, cautious, and evidence-based methods of rigorous science. It shows us that archaeology is never conducted in a vacuum. It is always shaped by the cultural, political, and personal desires of the present. Deep within the crypts of the Hathor Temple at Dendera in Egypt, a series of ancient stone reliefs have sparked a modern debate that perfectly illustrates the clash between orthodox archaeology and imaginative speculation. One specific carving seems to show a surreal and startlingly familiar scene: a giant, elongated light bulb containing a snake-like filament connected by cables to a box that is held by a priest-like figure, while a supporting jed pillar stands nearby. To the modern eye, it's an almost irresistible image. Could this be definitive proof that the ancient Egyptians possessed, or at least understood, the principles of electric lighting? This interpretation, known as the Dendera light bulb theory, has become a cornerstone of ancient astronaut and alternative history narratives, suggesting a lost technology so advanced it would force a complete rewrite of our understanding of the past. The theory gained significant traction in the late 20th century, popularized by authors like Erich von Däniken. Proponents point to the undeniable visual parallels. The bulbous object does indeed resemble a Crookes tube or an early incandescent bulb. The wavy line inside it is seen as a glowing filament. The cable leading to the box is interpreted as an electrical wire, and the box itself is posited to be a power source, perhaps a primitive battery akin to the controversial Baghdad Battery. They argue that the absence of soot on the ceilings of many elaborate Egyptian tombs and temples, places where torches or oil lamps would have left residue, is circumstantial evidence that another, cleaner light source must have been used. The Dendera carving in this view is the missing manual for that technology, a schematic left behind by ingenious priests or perhaps even knowledge gifted by otherworldly visitors. However, when we turn to the vast body of Egyptological scholarship, a completely different and far more culturally coherent explanation emerges. Mainstream Egyptologists universally identify the scene not as a technical diagram, but as a profound mythological representation. The key to understanding it lies not in a 20th century electrical manual, but in the ancient Egyptian creation myth. The bulb is actually a lotus flower, a potent symbol of birth and regeneration. The filament is not a tungsten coil but a snake, representing the deity Wadjet or the god Harsamtus, emerging from the lotus. This symbolizes the moment of creation itself, the emergence of the sun god from the primordial waters, as told in the Hermopolitan creation myth. The entire ensemble is a depiction of the hieroglyph for to rise in light or to be radiant. The cable is understood as a stylized lotus stem, and the power box is not a battery but a shrine or a container holding the sacred symbols of life and stability. The figure holding the entire apparatus is not an electrician, but a god or a priest performing a ritual act of creation and consecration. This interpretation is not a guess. It is supported by the extensive hieroglyphic text that surrounds the reliefs, which describe a religious ceremony and make no mention of any form of technology. The scene is one of many in the temple complex that celebrates the cyclical renewal of life, the power of the gods, and the pharaoh's role in maintaining cosmic order, themes that are the very bedrock of ancient Egyptian religion. This stark divide in interpretation is a textbook case of a psychological phenomenon known as pareidolia, the human brain's tendency to perceive familiar patterns, especially modern technological ones, in ambiguous stimuli. We are creatures of our time, and we instinctively view the past through the lens of our present. When we see the Dendera relief, our modern brains, saturated with images of light bulbs and electrical devices, make a quick and understandable connection. We project our own technological framework onto a culture that operated within an entirely different framework of myth, symbol, and spirituality. The real mystery of Dendera is not about lost electricity, but about the fascinating ways we, in the modern era, seek to find ourselves and our achievements reflected in the ancient world, sometimes at the expense of understanding that world on its own magnificent and complex terms. Leaving behind the charged debates over Gunung Padang and the symbolic carvings of Dendera, we now plunge into the deep, cerulean waters off the coast of Japan's westernmost island, Yonaguni. Here, in a region known for its fierce currents and hammerhead sharks, lies one of the most visually stunning and hotly contested underwater discoveries of our time. In 1986, a local diver seeking new sites to observe these sharks stumbled upon something that defied all expectation. Instead of a natural reef, he found himself floating above a massive, monolithic structure that looked for all the world like a grand, sunken temple complex. This is the Yonaguni Monument, a sprawling collection of rock formations featuring what appear to be massive, perfect steps, sharp right-angled corners, and two colossal pillars that look like they could have held up a gigantic roof. The sheer scale and geometric precision of the formations have led many to believe they are not the work of nature, but the drowned ruins of a lost civilization, a Pacific equivalent of Atlantis swallowed by the sea thousands of years ago. The man who became the monument's most famous champion was the late Masaaki Kimura, a marine geologist from the University of the Bukias. After hundreds of dives over 2 decades, Kimura developed an elaborate theory. He proposed that Yonaguni was not a single structure, but the remains of an entire city, complete with a stadium, temples, roads, and a pyramid, all of which sank in a massive seismic event, possibly the same catastrophic earthquake and tsunami that devastated the region around 3,000 years ago. He points to specific features that seem to defy natural explanation: a perfect archway, what looks like a carved relief of an animal, and a wide, flat area that resembles a plaza. For those who support his view, Yonaguni is the smoking gun, tangible proof of a sophisticated prehistoric culture in Japan, one whose history was erased by a sudden and violent rise in sea levels. The idea is profoundly compelling, offering a romantic and dramatic narrative of a forgotten world waiting to be rediscovered beneath the waves. However, the vast majority of geologists and mainstream archaeologists offer a far less sensational explanation, one rooted in the powerful and predictable forces of nature. They argue that the Yonaguni monument is a spectacular but entirely natural formation of sandstone and mudstone. This specific type of rock, known as the Iyama Formation, is naturally bedded in horizontal layers of varying hardness. Over millions of years, the powerful currents and relentless wave action in this region have eroded these layers at different rates. The softer rock wears away faster, while the harder layers are left behind, creating the dramatic step terraces and sharp, clean angles that so closely resemble staircases and platforms. This process, known as differential erosion, is a common geological phenomenon, responsible for creating stunning natural landmarks like the Giant's Causeway in Ireland or the rock formations in Monument Valley. The seemingly perfect right angles and straight lines are not a sign of human craftsmanship, but a product of the rock's natural jointing and cleavage planes, the inherent weaknesses in the stone where it most easily fractures. The debate over Yonaguni is a masterclass in a psychological principle we've encountered before: pareidolia. Our human brains are hardwired to seek out patterns, especially those that look man-made. When we see a series of flat surfaces meeting at sharp angles underwater, our first instinct is to see architecture. This is compounded by the environment itself. Diving is an inherently disorienting experience. The refracted light, the weightlessness, and the limited visibility all work together to blur the line between perception and reality. What looks like a carved channel from one angle might, from a different perspective, be clearly revealed as a simple, water-worn gully. The most compelling evidence for the natural theory came from a dive by the legendary skeptic Robert Schoch, a geologist who is himself no stranger to controversy. After examining the site, Schoch noted that many of the features are not isolated. The same types of sharp angles, flat surfaces, and step-like formations continue up the nearby cliff faces and along the coast above water, where they are unambiguously accepted as natural geological formations. The monument isn't an anomaly, it's simply the underwater extension of the island's natural bedrock, sculpted by the same universal forces. So why does Yonaguni continue to capture our imagination so fiercely, even in the face of strong scientific skepticism? The answer lies in the powerful allure of the unknown, particularly the deep ocean. The seafloor is the last great frontier on our planet, a place where we are still making profound discoveries. The idea that an ancient city could be hidden just beneath the waves, waiting for a brave diver to reveal its secrets, taps into a deep and universal human fascination with lost worlds and forgotten chapters of our history. It speaks to a longing for a past that was more dramatic and mysterious than the one recorded in our history books. Furthermore, the monument's location in Japan adds another layer of intrigue, as it sits in a region rich with indigenous Yukuan legends and stories of land that was lost to the sea in the distant past. For many, the scientific explanation, while logically sound, feels somehow insufficient to explain the sheer awe one feels when hovering above these colossal structures. The Yonaguni monument, therefore, endures not necessarily as proof of a sunken city, but as a symbol of the ocean's enduring mysteries. It represents all that we have yet to discover about our own planet and our own past, a silent, stony reminder that sometimes the most beautiful truths are not about what was built by human hands, but about the incredible artistic power of nature itself. But if the idea of a sunken city captures our imagination, our final artifact takes us to a discovery so ancient it seems to defy the very timeline of life itself. Deep within the mines of South Africa, where workers extracted a mineral known as pyrophyllite from rock formations dating back an almost incomprehensible 2.8 billion years, a series of peculiar objects began to surface. These were the so-called grooved spheres of South Africa, and at first glance they presented a mystery that could have come straight from the pages of a science fiction novel. The objects are small, typically no more than an inch or two in diameter, and they are almost perfectly spherical or disc-shaped. Most astonishingly, many of them are encircled by 2 or 3 parallel grooves that run neatly around their equator, giving them an appearance that is strikingly, undeniably manufactured. They were found embedded deep within the Precambrian rock, a layer of the Earth's crust that formed billions of years before the first dinosaurs, before the first fish, even before complex life of any kind had evolved on the planet. For those who first encountered them, the implication was staggering. If these were man-made or made by some intelligent force, then everything we thought we knew about the history of our world, and perhaps even the universe, was catastrophically wrong. The most extraordinary claims suggested these spheres were artifacts of a non-human intelligence, perhaps even evidence of an ancient advanced civilization that existed on Earth long before humanity. Others, looking further out, proposed they were components of ancient machinery or navigational tools left behind by extraterrestrial visitors. The narrative was powerful because it tapped into a fundamental human question. Are we alone, and is our history truly our own? The spheres seem to offer a tangible, physical answer, a piece of evidence that could be held in the hand, a relic from an impossible time that suggested our planet has seen cycles of intelligence rise and fall over billions of years. It's a concept that fuels countless stories and theories, and the grooved spheres became a flagship piece of evidence for this worldview, a small metallic key to a vastly larger and more mysterious cosmic history. However, when these objects were subjected to rigorous geological and mineralogical analysis, a far more natural, though no less fascinating, story emerged. The spheres are not made of some strange alloy. They are composed primarily of either pyrite, commonly known as fool's gold, or the mineral hematite. Geologists identify them as a common, if particularly well-formed, type of concretion. Concretions are hardened masses that form when mineral cement precipitates and accumulates around a nucleus, a tiny grain of sand, a fossil, or even a fleck of organic material within the surrounding sedimentary rock. They are nature's sculptures created by the patient, chemical-rich work of groundwater percolating through stone over immense periods. The incredibly precise grooves and spherical shapes are not the result of tools or design, but of the crystalline structure of the minerals themselves and the unique conditions under which they formed. The parallel grooves often correspond to the crystal planes within the mineral, a natural geometric pattern dictated by the atomic arrangement of the atoms as the concretion slowly grew layer by layer. In the case of the pyrite spheres, their formation is often linked to volcanic activity and the metamorphic processes that create the pyrophyllite they are found in. The story of the grooved spheres is perhaps the most perfect example of a psychological phenomenon we've seen again and again: pareidolia. This is our brain's innate, hardwired tendency to perceive familiar patterns, especially faces and manufactured objects, in random stimuli. It's why we see a face in the moon or a castle in a cloud. When we look at these spheres, our modern minds, surrounded by manufactured objects and machine parts, immediately interpret those parallel lines and perfect curves as evidence of design. We are pattern-seeking creatures, and that skill has been essential to our survival and technological progress. But this same strength can lead us astray. causing us to impose meaning and intention on the utterly natural and random processes of the world. The grooved spheres represent this tendency in its purest form. They are a Rorschach test etched in stone, where some see a message from a lost civilization, while geologists see the beautiful and predictable outcome of chemistry and time. This doesn't make them any less wondrous. The true miracle is not that some ancient intelligence carved them, but that the blind, unguided forces of geology could produce an object of such symmetrical perfection. They are a testament to the fact that nature is the greatest artist of all, capable of creating forms of stunning complexity and regularity without any blueprint or plan. The grooved spheres of South Africa ultimately teach us a humbling and beautiful lesson about our place in the universe. Our desire to find meaning and connection is powerful, but sometimes the most profound truth is that the world is full of natural marvels that need no designer to be astonishing. They remind us to appreciate the incredible stories that geology can tell, stories of a dynamic Earth that was shaping itself into beautiful forms billions of years before we ever arrived to wonder at them. As we reach the end of our journey through these 30 astonishing discoveries, one thing becomes overwhelmingly clear. The human story is infinitely more complex, more mysterious, and more fascinating than any single narrative can contain. From a Norse coin in a New England shell heaped to a Roman head beneath a Mexican pyramid, and from a delicate antelope artifact in an African mine to a modern-day monument destroyed for its controversial message, these objects form a tapestry of enigmas that defy simple explanation. They are not merely curiosities, they are profound challenges, each one a question mark etched in stone, metal, or clay, forcing us to constantly re-evaluate what we think we know about our collective past. This incredible diversity of artifacts scattered across every continent and from every era reminds us that history is not a closed book but a living, breathing dialogue between the past and the present, forever subject to new interpretations and discoveries. What these out-of-place artifacts ultimately teach us is a masterclass in humility and critical thinking. They highlight the immense complexities of archaeological interpretation, where a single object can be seen as proof of a lost civilization, a clever hoax, or a simple case of mistaken context. The journey of the Coso Artifact, for instance, is a perfect lesson in this. Initially hailed as evidence of ancient advanced technology, it was ultimately revealed through rigorous analysis to be a 20th century spark plug encased in a rapidly formed concretion. This doesn't make its story any less compelling. Rather, it showcases the essential role of scientific skepticism. It demonstrates how our initial, wonder-filled conclusions must always be tempered by meticulous examination, peer review, and a willingness to follow the evidence even when it leads to a more mundane truth. This process is not a dismissal of mystery, but a respect for it, a commitment to finding the real story, no matter how ordinary it may seem compared to our fantasies. This balancing act between open-minded curiosity and healthy skepticism is the very heart of any historical investigation. We must be open to the possibility of the incredible, to the idea that our timelines might be wrong and our maps incomplete. The Antikythera Mechanism stands as a stunning testament to this, a device so advanced that its discovery forced us to completely reassess the technological capabilities of the ancient Greeks. It was not a hoax or a mistake, but a genuine anomaly that expanded our understanding. Yet, for every Antikythera mechanism, there is an Ica stone or a crystal skull, a compelling narrative that, upon closer inspection, crumbles under the weight of evidence, revealing itself to be a product of modern desire rather than ancient ingenuity. These cases aren't failures, they are crucial reminders of why we need a rigorous scientific process to separate genuine historical breakthroughs from the stories we desperately wish were true. The enduring power of these mysteries, whether solved or unsolved, speaks to a fundamental part of the human spirit, our insatiable need to wonder, to explore, and to seek answers to the biggest questions of our origins. We are drawn to these puzzles not just for the answers they might provide, but for the conversations they start and the horizons they expand. They invite us to look at the world with a sense of wonder, to question authority, and to imagine possibilities beyond the confines of our textbooks. So, as we conclude this exploration, the invitation to you, the viewer, is to carry forward both this sense of wonder and this tool of skepticism. Embrace the thrill of the unknown, delve into the mysteries that captivate you, but always arm yourself with a critical eye and a demand for evidence. Celebrate the mysteries of our world, for they are what drive discovery, but always remember that the truth, however unexpected or ordinary, is often more fascinating than any fiction we could ever invent. The greatest artifact we can ever uncover is not a lost relic, but a deeper, more nuanced understanding of our incredible, shared human journey.